Nice mic. Okay, awesome. Thank you. I appreciate that. So before we get into the questions, I wanted to just share something with you really quick and actually start by asking you a question. So I'm going to share my screen here with these slides really quick. So I want to ask you, I'm going to pop up the chat once again and make sure that this bad boy is recording too. It should be recording. Okay, it is recording. Okay, so who here listens to podcasts? I just want to make sure I'm curious of those of you who are here on the chat with us right now. I see a bunch of you raising your hand. Yes, I do. Okay, great. So you're all in the right place. And I'm curious, like, how many of you actually don't listen to podcasts? You don't have to. I know that it is a time commitment for sure. But at the same time, even if you're not listening to podcasts, you should definitely consider starting one, or at least being a guest on another person's show, because it's such a powerful tool. And we'll talk more about that in the minute. So a lot of you are listening to podcasts. Okay, that's great. Here's the thing: 36% of the population is now listening to podcasts. That's huge, especially from where it came from. And this data is coming from HubSpot.com and some 2016 information that came in. So it could be much higher than this. But you're probably getting a sense that podcasting is becoming a lot more popular these days because of just we're all hearing about it now, which is great. Now, who here listens to more than one show? I'm curious. So a lot of you might be listening to just that one and only show that you have. But how many of you are listening to more than one show? So look at the chat right now. Several, me, sometimes two, 6+, 10+ shows. If you were to guess what the average number of shows a person subscribes to, what would you place that guess as if you were to guess? So 3 to 4, 5, 6, 15, 4. So Stephanie says, I have like 20 that I listen to. The number of shows that are consumed per week per person on average is 5. That's a lot. I mean, podcasting is being consumed in ways that no other content has been able to be consumed. And there's a lot of reasons for that, and I'll go over that in just a moment. So Miss Eileen says, I can't even count. I dip in, but not consistent. Yeah, everybody has their different rhythms, but the average number of shows a person listens to per week is 5. Now, to interact with you just a little bit further before we get into the questions, how long are you listening for an episode? Or per episode that you listen to, like how long are you listening for? Or when you go into a podcast listening session, how long are you listening for? 45 minutes, 1 hour, 1 hour till the end, says Andres. Very good. That's good, because that probably means those podcast episodes are great, because a lot of people might want to cut out in the middle there. 30 minutes, 45 minutes max, 40 minutes to 1 hour, 15 minutes, one episode, 30 minutes, depends on the road trip. There you go. They're listening more than any other platform. When you think of a blog post, you might spend 10 to 15 minutes reading it, and not even reading every single word, right? You're typically skimming it. With a YouTube video, yes, you might watch all the way through, especially if it's an engaging video, which isn't always easy to produce, by the way. But at the same time, I mean, you can only spend so much time watching video. People are listening to podcasts for sometimes hours at a time, or cat videos, Paul says. And it is an amazing way to get your message in front of another brand. So where are people listening to podcast? Where are you listening to podcasts? I mean, they're listening everywhere, right? In places that no other content can be, right? Think about video and think about blog posts. You don't want to read or watch while you're driving. You don't want to read or watch while you're working out, or while you're walking the dog, or when you're on a plane. You don't even have access to the internet. Well, if you have a podcast, people are listening to you on the go while they're going. Joseph says, while gardening. I do it personally while I'm doing the dishes. Cooking, says Michelle. That's a great one. Andre says, car and work, iPhone, commute. Yeah, let's talk about commute really quick. 143 million commuters. This is U.S. only, by the way. 143 commuters every single day, Monday to Friday, most likely. And 76% of them drive alone. That's insane, right? And so they should be listening to you. And a lot of people are listening to podcasts now while on a drive, as you can tell. Paul says 143 million all in New York. Yeah, right? Here's what's cool about podcasting. Every time you come out with a new episode, it gets pushed to each subscriber, so it gets onto their phone, unlike many other content platforms where it's like, okay, you have to just kind of be there right at the right time, especially with social media. Every new episode that you come out with gets pushed to each new subscriber. You can compete and beat the big boys, which is really cool. There's still, actually, if you guys downloaded the cheat sheet, there's even some more data in here. Let me scroll. 200,000 active blogs, or active podcasts, right? Not even, 20%, or about 20% of a million. 19 million active blogs. Look at that comparison. 200,000 active podcasts, 19 million active blogs. So I think all the signs are there that yes, like podcasting is something we should be interested in either doing or getting onto other people's shows. I know a lot of you are like, I don't really want to start a podcast, and you don't have to, right? I mean, I'm going to be talking about my program, Power Up Podcasting, at the end of this, but I want to answer your questions too. But even if you don't start a podcast of your own, consider how you might be able to be a guest on another person's show. That's similar. You know, when you have a podcast or when you get access to a podcast, whether it's yours or somebody else's, you're on a stage, right? So imagine you're starting a podcast and you have, 400 downloads per episode, right? On the surface, especially for long-term podcasters, it's like, oh, that's not that much. But what if you, Josh is asking, how do I download the cheat sheet? The cheat sheet is available at, let's see, if you go to smartpassiveincome.com/podcast cheat sheet, I think. There you go. So smartpassiveincome.com/podcast cheat sheet. You can get it right there. So thank you for that. But yeah, I mean, all signs are pointing to yes with the podcasting stuff, right? Okay. And here's the coolest part. It's just you and them. Like where this arrow is pointing, right on that earbud, this is you and this is them. You are literally in a person's ear. And that's unlike any other form of content. There's no exit. You can't exit out of it much easier. Like there's no distractions. There's no ads like going just right on top of it. It's just you and them, which is the most powerful thing. Miss Eileen says, I've appeared as a guest on a few podcasts and they are so much fun. Totally. You're on another person's stage. And if you only have 400 downloads per episode, I mean, think about that. If you were to go to a conference and speak in front of 400 people, well, that changes the game, right? Well, every listener is essentially a person in your audience like that. And here's what can happen when you start a podcast. When I started my podcast, I started getting fan mail. And thank you, Ndai, for putting that link in there for the PDF. Go ahead and download that there. Teresa says, love being a guest. Totally, right? But as a result of starting my podcast, I started getting fan mail. That never happened from my blog. That never happened from my YouTube videos. Only after 2010 when I started getting fan mail. People started sending me stuff, right? How crazy is this? Like somebody sent me this, Ernesto from Mexico has this really unique form of art where literally this is string on beeswax. How insane is that? And here's another thing. You're going to gain some amazing, passionate people as a result of starting your show. Pat, it's Thursday. My episodes come out on Wednesday. So I was a little bit late one time, and Steven sends me an email. He goes, Pat, it's Thursday. Where the bleep is episode 112. The funny part about this is what he followed up with. Thanks, love your stuff, Steve. Right? Like, hey, Pat, it's Thursday. Where's episode 112? By the way, love your stuff. But you get these passionate listeners who are just so insanely obsessed, as you can, I mean, even at Liberty Madison here says, I am obsessed with podcasts, right? So Tom, great question. Put that in the Q&A session there. As a result of starting a podcast, I've been able to meet a lot of my listeners and build communities and have people create, their own communities as a result of the show, which is really cool. I've been able to meet and converse with some of the influencers who I look up to, like Gary Vaynerchuk. I wouldn't have been able to access Gary Vaynerchuk, most likely, in at least not a creeper sort of fashion, unless I had my podcast, right? So super cool. Here's me in December 2008 when I first started. That's a mic that I don't use anymore. I didn't know what I was doing. I spent all this money, and I was like, okay, I'm going to start this podcast. Let's get going. This is me in my parents' bedroom before I moved out, and this is as I was kind of building my business with the architecture stuff. My first episode didn't come out until July of 2010. Guys, December 2008 to July of 2010. Why? Because I had so many questions. I didn't know what to do. I didn't have some help, and I just wanted some people to be there to answer a few questions for me. So that's why I'm here for you right now. So how can I help you? How can I help you guys? That's why we're here. So I'm going to answer as many questions as I can. I see a number of them in the Q&A session already. Hopefully that gives you a little bit of a warm-up, fires you up a little bit. And like I said, I'm going to be here probably for the next hour. I said we'd go for an hour, but I'll go a little bit longer or as long as I need to for you guys. So I'm going to scroll up, and I'm going to answer these questions live. So Purpose Girl asks, hey, are you going to make this recording available afterwards? Yes. Yes, absolutely. You will get a link to it directly for sure. John Clark says, hey, Pat, I'm wondering how important it is to have my podcast name match my business name. For some context, I'm a private practice consultant for therapists. My consulting business blog is called Private Practice Workshop. I name my podcast The Marketing Workshop because there are a bunch of private practice podcasts, but none that really dive deep into marketing in particular. Released 4 episodes so far. Congrats, it's awesome. But I'm wondering if I should rename the Private Practice Workshop podcast to better build my brand and trust. Does it have to match your brand? No, it doesn't. Actually, we're discussing this very thing here in the Power Up Podcasting Student Center. There's you can see people like posting their artwork and leaving comments about it, which is really fun. Somebody mentioned yesterday that they have a show that is where is it here? So Midlife Mastery is the name of their show. Midlife Tribe is the name of their website. And I think that works perfectly, right? Because, hey, you want to get the mastery to learn how to master your midlife, arena here. Why don't you? I was like, I was sharing my screen, but I didn't actually click to share the screen. I'll show you really quick. So this is the student center for Power Up Podcasting. We have like 200 plus members in here, all talking, sharing their artwork, getting comments and stuff. One person, this is Peter. He talked the other day about his website, which is called Midlife Tribe. Midlife Tribe was his website, and he was asking the same question, what should I make the name of my podcast? We decided to call it Midlife Mastery. So that way they kind of cross-promote each other, and they're different, right? So you can know which one is the podcast, which one is the website, but they cross-promote each other, right? Hey, you want to join the Midlife Tribe? Come to the website at midlifetribe.com, right? And that's for the people who are listening on the podcast. Or if you're on the website, hey, you want to master this part of your life right now, go ahead and check out the podcast at Mastery. Midlife Mastery. So no, they don't have to be the same. They can be the same, right? Like I have the Smart Passive Income podcast and smartpassiveincome.com. And I see still a lot of questions coming in the chat. Make sure you put them in the Q&A box there. So no, they don't have to match. I think the strategy there is actually best if they don't match, to be honest. So there you go. Okay, Saeed says, do you need a website for your podcast, or can you engage purely on a landing page and social media until you have some momentum to have a website launch? So let me answer this question for you. Oops, not that one. So answer live. So Saeed, great question. Can you hypothetically have a podcast without having a website? Yes, absolutely. You get your feed from your podcasting host, your audio host, and then you can plop that into iTunes and your podcast will be up and running. However, I will encourage everybody, and through my course, I say you must start a website. Not because technically you have to. You don't technically have to, but because you want people to come by and actually engage with more of your stuff. You want your website to essentially be the hub where action can then happen. There's only so much you can do on a landing page. Yes, you could set up a landing page as the sort of primary home on a website, through like lead pages or something. But I would encourage you to start a website. You don't need much more on it than just the podcast and the show notes. I mean, where are the show notes going to live, right? Show notes are very, very helpful. And I have a lot of people coming back to the website because of the show notes specifically. Marty says, I have to go because of a family emergency. I hope everything is okay, Marty. No worries. You'll get the replay afterwards. I mentioned iTunes. Yeah, Paula, if you have a question, put it in the Q&A session. But you don't need a website, but I encourage it because that's where you can much easier control that experience that people have with your brand. People can find other episodes or written content if you choose to do that. You don't have to have a blog with the podcast, but it can help. But also collecting email addresses more importantly. So Gary says, I'm so excited about this. Love your podcast. I know how to get good sound on my own and capture it, but how do I ensure good audio for my guests and capture it on my computer? What platforms do this? So Zoom is a great platform to do that, Gary. Although I will say your audio as a podcast host should be great. Your guest's audio doesn't have to be great. When you listen to the radio, for example, and a DJ, they have a really nice voice. Hey, welcome to Kixie 95.5. What's your name, caller? And then the caller calls in and it just sounds like a phone, right? And it's totally fine. It's okay if your guest doesn't have the best audio. Now, of course, you want them to be, audible and you want them to be understood. But there are a number of ways to go about that. Not worry about it so much. So even if they're calling in through the phone, you can call in through Skype using their cell phone and just call their cell phone and record that if you want. Or you can use a tool like Zoom. Zoom will record it for you. They give you the MP3 file that you can drop into, whatever audio software you use later. You can also use Skype to Skype, so you can ask people to be on Skype on the other end. And there's other tools like a Ringer, RINGR.com. I'll show you this really quick. This is a handy tool for those of you who are thinking about doing podcasting and just aren't quite sure about, I think it's Ringer.com. I hope it's Ringer.com. There we go. Record a conversation with anyone, and you can do this through the web. And the person on the other end doesn't have to download a software or anything. It's all done sort of remotely through a software, and it records the raw file on both sides, which is really nice. and then it combines them together into a podcast episode. So ringr.com is another great way to do that. Done. All right. Saeed again. Besides iTunes, what platform has a global outside US reach? Do they have new and noteworthy type deal to help you get your podcast off the ground? So iTunes is great. They have global, access to an audience. Stitcher as well, and then Google Play. Those are the top three, and I show you how to get through into all those. New and noteworthy, I mean, they have that, but even new and noteworthy on iTunes isn't as strong as it used to be. So I encourage my students just to not even worry about that. Just go create a great episode, create a launch execution plan to get it in front of as many people as possible, have them want to share it, all these kinds of things we outline. And that way you can get in front of the most people as possible without relying on other platforms like iTunes. If you get on New and Noteworthy or the What's Hot list, that's great. That's a bonus. Very helpful, says Kevin. Great. You guys are awesome. Will you be teaching on how to edit audio using Adobe Audition in the course? That's funny. I've had a few people ask that, and I actually use Adobe Audition myself. I didn't include that in the course yet because it's an additional paid thing that people have. And typically in my courses, I want people to not have to pay even more to be able to actually do what they do. However, I will be putting together a complete live Adobe Audition, not live, but a recorded Adobe Audition sequence. And I'll show you how I run through my episodes with Ask Pat and SPI using Adobe Audition in the course. That is not there yet, but it is coming. I'm always updating the stuff. Kelly says, I'd like to know the best way to track analytics for podcasts to gauge performance. What tools do you use for that? How do you best encourage advertisers with those metrics? So typically advertisers are going to look at 6 weeks worth of downloads per episode. That's how they gauge whether or not it's interesting enough to get on. But I also will say that it's your job to let them know how targeted your audience is too. Now, what's really cool about the advertiser sponsorship model is you get paid per CPM, or costs per 1,000 listeners. And so even if you have 1,000 listeners only, if they're very highly targeted, I mean, you can still get paid for that. Your advertisers aren't going to pay more than they would anyway with a CPM model like that. It can grow and scale with you over time, which is great. The tools that you can use your hosting company to show you how many downloads or listens that you get. You can use iTunes is actually coming out with some upcoming podcaster-related data stuff, which is so exciting to me because that's one of the most requested things that I've had just with iTunes in general is just more podcasting data from iTunes. That's coming. They've announced that recently with their latest iOS update and on my keynote and their latest keynote and stuff. So that's really excited. I'm stoked about that. Yeah, so I mean, those are the basic things you need. But also other things that advertisers are looking for is website traffic and also email list. You could utilize those to increase your CPM or cost per 1,000 downloads as well. So this is a great question from Sheena. How is it different than the free podcasting tutorial? Tell me more of what's included. So Power Up Podcasting, which you can all find at poweruppodcasting.com. It is a higher level course than my free podcasting tutorial. Now, if you can't afford or just want to get started with the basics, freepodcastingtutorial.com is definitely the place to go. However, I will say that, let me share my screen here really quick just to show you. Poweruppodcasting.com is where you go. But this course goes into much more depth, much more hand-holding along the way. And of course, it has also the community built in along with it, the Student Center, which the free podcasting course does not, as well as office hours with me. So we'll be doing Zooms just like this over time. Actually, there are 2 office hours that are going to happen on Tuesday after the carts close on Monday. But what's also really cool about this is it goes into the marketing of it. It goes into the details of, okay, how do you run a great guest interview? How do you even get guests to say yes to come on your show? The marketing execution plan and the launch execution plan, like I said earlier, how to actually automate and hand off the show to other people later so you can just focus on the recording and actually make it a little bit more passive. It's not going to be ever completely passive, but you can make it more automated so it's just more help and hands-on from the outside. How to build your email list, how to monetize, all those things are in this course and are not in the free podcasting tutorial. I also see a lot of questions related to monetization here as well, but here's a question from Ross. What kind of mic are you using? This is a Heil PR40. The mic that I recommend is the ATR 2100, which will sound virtually exactly the same. And what's really cool about that mic, and I list all the equipment in the course and stuff too, actually, that is lesson 2 here in the course. I'll take you inside really quick just so you can see what the content looks like. So here's inside the course. Lesson 2 right here is actually all about your, I didn't sign in. I'll need to log in to do that. Anyway, I'll do that later. But lesson 2 actually walks you through all the different gear things that you need to buy, and it's not more than $100. This mic alone costs like $400. Okay, Renzi says, or Rezi says, anyone experiencing audio issues? Yeah, this is a new PR40 that came out with a gold trim and then also the black, which is really cool. Typically, it's gray on gray, gray on gray. If you're having audio issues, just refresh or hit refresh or join in again. It should typically work. Okay, I'm going through these questions as fast as I can. Jason says, if you had to start from the beginning with no podcast, what would you do first and why? How would you launch? So I made the mistake of launching with just one episode. I would launch with anywhere between 3 and 5 to start. I would also go live first and practice if I wasn't confident enough, and I definitely wasn't at first. I would go live on Facebook and live on Instagram just to kind of practice what it's like to kind of just talk to a device. It is a little bit weird, I will say, to just be in my office and talk to this microphone, but just a couple sessions talking live and knowing there's other people on the other end can be really helpful and encouraging. And the other part about it is I would do a little bit more planning in terms of, okay, what are my episodes going to be about? I got to a point about a year into the podcast where I just felt like it became a chore. This is one of the things I teach in my course, is just how to make sure that you're always staying on top of things and how you're not letting it overwhelm you and not feeling like a chore. I almost gave up on it, actually. And it wasn't until I started planning my editorial calendar a little bit further ahead that things started to kind of happen much faster. And I wasn't stuck in that, okay, what am I going to record today mode, which just sucks, right? It's like, okay, you publish an episode and immediately like, okay, gosh, I got to do this again next week. Like, that's the last thing you want, because then it's never going to work for you. You're going to have no energy. What you want to do is go, oh man, like I can't wait till I get to that episode 2 months from now, because it's going to help promote my podcasting course and it's going to be so exciting. I have this guest coming on, but for now, just let me get through these current episodes. And Miss Eileen says, you seem much more relaxed now. Maybe it was just me. You're crushing it as always. Thank you. You could just get better over time, right? I mean, even if you go back to episode 1 of the SPA podcast, it's just I can't listen to it without cringing. And you hear a lot of ums and weird pauses, and you just get better over time. That's the other cool byproduct of starting a podcast, is because you're continually talking and communicating, you're going to become a better communicator over time. I've seen it play a role in the communication that I have at networking events, at conferences, even with my family and friends. I'm just better able to tell stories, which is really cool too. All right. Cindy says, I've been doing weekly live broadcasts for 20 months. I'm thinking about using the audio from them as a podcast. Is this a good strategy? Cindy, it is, but it also isn't. And what I mean by that, and to rephrase this question, Cindy's going live through video on, I don't know what platforms, but any other platform out there, Facebook, I would assume. Can you just strip the audio from those and put those into podcasts? Yes, you can. You could totally repurpose that content. However, I will say you got to be careful, because if at any point in that video you're saying, "Hey, look at me," or check out this bottle right here. This is a Hydro Flask. Look how cute that logo is. I don't really think it's cute. I'm just using this as an example. And it like opens like this. If somebody were to listen to that, they're going to have no idea what you're talking about, right? And they're going to feel left out. And so one thing that Chalene Johnson does very smartly is she will go live, and she actually repurposes that content for her podcast, but she has a specific chunk in the middle of the live stream where she lets people know, hey guys, I'm going to be presenting about this thing really quick, so I won't be able to interact with you, and so don't worry about that right now. I'll be able to catch you on the other side of what I'm about to share with you. That way, because also the interaction with people is a little bit weird for audio when you listen later. Like what we're doing right now, like, hey, Miss Eileen and Di and Joaquin and Paul, thanks for being here. Right? Like if you were to listen to that on a podcast, it's like, well, that's not live and those people aren't actually there at that time, right? So what Chalene does is she chunks the middle of her live stream, specifically knowing she's going to repurpose that part for audio. And that in that chunk, she doesn't interact with people and she doesn't mention things that are visual. So that works really well for her. And so yeah, you could totally do that. There's probably parts of your existing stuff right now, Sydney, where you can pull stuff out and do it that way. And Nan says, hey, Pat, my niche is about cars, Ferrari in particular. Sweet. Which is very visual. Should I focus solely on YouTube, or is a podcast a good opinion? I keep flip-flopping. You can do very well with a visual-related podcast. Now, it's funny because we had just talked about this in the previous question. The thing is, let's take photography, for example. Photography is a very visual thing, right? However, what is a podcast great for? Teaching and storytelling. So for photographers, for example, you could teach people, okay, hey guys, when I'm going into a wedding shoot, here are the 10 things that I make sure to have with me and think about before I go into a wedding and meet the client on their wedding day. Those are things you could say. Or you can say, hey, photographers, I want to tell you about the story of the worst client I ever had. I'm not going to use that person's name. His name is John. But no, I'm just kidding. But see how you can tell stories and really get the other parts that are outside the visual aspect of that niche and really start to build a relationship with people in that way. Podcasts are great for teaching, not teaching all things, right? Like some things, it's like if you were to teach somebody how to put together a model boat, doing that with a podcast isn't going to work so well. But if you're teaching somebody a process and something that requires things to not necessarily things to put together, but things people can do, then it can work out very well. And then also storytelling. So, what stories can you tell related to Ferraris? Can you invite people who work at the Ferrari factory to come on and talk about their experience and how they got their job? That's something you don't need to see to just really get into. Those are kinds of things that can work really well with the podcast for things like that. So, hey guys, just doing a mid-hour check-in here. Like I said, we're going to go over the hour because there's a lot of questions coming in I want to make sure I answer. But I also want to ask you, are you guys getting value out of this? I just want to make sure that these questions are relevant to you, that they are being answered in a way that is helpful, and that is, at least we're just having fun, if anything, right? Okay, cool. Steve, Paul, yes, Tom. Okay, sweet. And that's a good, like, if you guys go live every once in a while, like, I know you can get into the zone, right? You can just keep going. So a great tip for you, just kind of as a side note, check in with your audience every once in a while, get them to interact. I think it's really cool when you ask a question to your audience and they interact as kind of a reset, right? Like we're doing right now. So you guys are on the other side of it. But when you go live, do that every once in a while. And what I think it does is even for people who are on the outside not talking, they can see the chatter and you guys are essentially validating that we're doing really good. Whew, Larry says, keep going to 5 p.m. Yeah, 5 p.m. Australia time maybe. Or maybe not. Maybe that would be even longer. Anyway, Grant here says, how do I improve how I speak on my podcast? Example, my volume, my cadence, etc. Okay, so first of all, that's something that you're just going to learn over time in general by starting. So the first tip is to just start. The second tip is that there's actually some lessons in the course that go over cadence and rhythm and how to use your microphone, how to best speak. The number one thing you can do, Grant, and this is for everybody, record yourself and then listen. Listen with intent. And I think when you do that, not just listen with cringing, but listen with intent, you're not going to like your voice, and it doesn't matter what your voice sounds like to you, right? But what you're listening for is cadence, is rhythm. And when I listen to myself, I often see that I'm speaking too fast, even though to me when I'm speaking, it doesn't seem that fast. But I often listen to myself before I go live, or I listen to myself not in a kind of, conceited way, but just to kind of remind myself that, okay, I need to slow down a little bit. And it's hard because when I get nervous, I tend to speak quite fast, as you can tell right now. But yeah, Joaquin says, people hate listening to themselves. Practice makes perfect. This is a great question for sure. Another thing that you can do is listen to other podcasts and just really start to get in tune with while you listen, because it's very easy to just go on autopilot when you're listening. But going into a podcast that you listen to with the intent of listening for those things that you're discussing, just to kind of get an idea of the rhythm. There's also some great content in books and videos out there related to storytelling. I think storytelling is such an underserved, underutilized skill that we should all learn how to do. And so with my work speaking on stage and studying that, I think that translates very well to speaking to. There's a great book by Dale Carnegie called Stand and Deliver. Stand and Deliver. And that's a great book that is for speakers. But hey, what are we doing on a microphone? We're speaking. Miss Eileen says, anchor.fm is a great place to text your cadence and tone as well. Definitely. Great questions, guys. These are a lot of fun. And we're going to get through as many of these as possible. Mary says, I already have a WordPress.org site for my blog at inneranswers.net, but is it better if I have a separate WordPress site for my podcast? They are on the same message. From Mary in West Australia. I'm actually going to be visiting East Australia very soon. I'm actually headed to Brisbane and Melbourne next week to speak at the Bro Blogger Conference. So I'm not going to be around Perth or wherever you might be, Mary. But anyway, to answer your question, you should keep it on the same website. That way, it's all just one place where people can go. If they're on the website as web traffic, they can see your podcast there. And if they're on the podcast, they can come back and see your website too. Very, very simple. Just keep it easy. You don't have to worry about a second property that way too. Okay, podcasts versus Facebook Live. Thoughts, says Amy. So both have great potential for building your brand. Both are amazing at building a relationship. The interesting thing about Facebook Live, even though the replays are available, is that the main benefit is this live thing like we're doing right now, right? Like that interaction. They definitely live on though afterwards, but I feel like a podcast is a lot more evergreen. I mean, you might have done live streams even last week that won't get watched anymore because you've come out with a lot more stuff, right? But with podcasting, especially with it being so topic centric or guest centric, that's something that can live on forever. I have old episodes from 2008 or excuse me, 2010 that are still getting listened to and still, like, I know are providing results because in those podcast episodes, I'm having people take action with certain URLs and I'm keeping track of that. So it's going very well. But podcasts, I feel, are a lot more evergreen. Plus, people can listen to you on the go even without an internet connection. So that's pretty huge. Diana says, smart passive income equals awesome. Thank you for that. What was the 33% of the world population listening to podcasts, in which case it would be almost 2.5 billion people, or is that just US or NA? Lee, I believe that is a HubSpot.com reference from a study they did, and that's US only, I believe. So 33%. I don't believe I said 33% of the world population. Let me verify that. Anyway, yeah. So hopefully that makes sense. Cool. Dr. Huntley says, hi, Pat, I have a brand new website. Congrats. I know I want to start a podcast, but wondering if I should wait until I have a certain number of subscribers before launching. If so, is there a magic number? Thanks for having this today and for inviting me to join. Thank you all for being here, by the way. Should you have a certain amount of subscribers before you start a podcast? No. You can use your podcast to start to get subscribers, and not just any subscribers, but really, really targeted subscribers who know you and love you for what you do, who can become fans much sooner. So I wouldn't wait. And I feel like this is, Mr. Huntley, just a little bit of an excuse maybe for you to start because you're scared. And that's totally okay. I totally get it. And, if that's not the case, I'm sorry, but I'm just, I'm sorry for maybe calling you out essentially here. But I think this is something a lot of people can relate to, right? You're looking for almost excuses not to start. Whereas I feel every day that you don't have a podcast out there is a day you're missing out on the opportunity to really begin a relationship or to take a relationship you have with an existing subscriber even further. And I would say, even starting from zero, from scratch with no audience is something you can do. Actually, there's a woman named Dr. B who I think there's a testimonial on poweruppodcasting.com that she left. I don't know if it says specifically what she did, but she started from scratch. Yeah, so here we go. So I'm going to share this with you really quick. This is her testimonial on Power Up Podcasting. Even in my 60s, I went for it because Pat showed me it's doable. I don't believe there's anything you can pay for that will give you the feeling I'm experiencing with myself doing my show. Nothing. There's no amount of money. Oh, she didn't say that. I'm sorry. She mentioned on the recent podcast episode she was featured in that she started from nothing. No subscribers, none of that stuff. And now she's getting, I think she emailed me the other day. She likes to kind of keep me up to date with her information and her stuff. She had 466 downloads the other day, like all in a single day. And that's with starting from scratch. So that's insanely cool. Let's see. Kelly says, when coming up with content, I'm concerned that if we are doing a podcast, interacting on social media, et cetera, where is the balance with giving away so much content and encouraging folks who still want more enough to pay for it? Do you repurpose content but give different levels per platform? So much to do on the to-do list. I see the value, but trying. Yeah, Kelly, this is a really interesting topic, the idea of, okay, well, how much should you really give away? And for me personally, as many of you probably know, you want to give away as much as humanly possible that makes sense on the platforms that you're on. And that's why I have free tutorials. That's why I go all out and, give away things for free that essentially people would pay for. But at the same time, you have to also create things that people will pay for. You are serving people by selling. And yes, not everybody will buy your thing, but you also know that some people will only get results if they buy your thing, especially if you go deeper into it and you give them a little bit of access to you, and you also you also have a community to go along with it. I mean, it could help out really well. Even though I give away information for free in my book, Will It Fly? Like literally the entire process of how to validate your business idea, people still got the course that is essentially the same material, but walks people through a little bit more deeply, gives people access to those office hours and also the community that goes along with it. If you provide a ton of value to people, there will be people, even if they get results with that free information, who will want to pay you for a number of different reasons. One, because your free stuff is so great, they're going to want the paid stuff because it's going to be even better in their minds, and it should be, right? But secondly, they're going to want to look for ways to repay you. And that's because of this law of reciprocity, right? Like when somebody helps you, you can't help but find another way to help people back. Okay. Some chatter about Toastmasters in the group. That's really cool. And again, thank you guys for being here. Let's see. Luis says, thanks for the session. Will the techniques and monetization forms you'll teach the course work for any podcast market, regardless of the language? My target would be Spanish language audience. Yeah, I don't think monetization is based on the language that you speak. It is based on the problems that you are solving in the market that you're getting into, and also the other companies that are there that could potentially sponsor. Now, I will say there are 4 different ways to monetize your podcast that I talk about in the course. I'll go through them with you right now. The advertising sponsorship model, which I talked about earlier, which is great for many different reasons, but also at the same time, you have to kind of consider that when you share another brand on your stuff, you're like almost inviting people to go away from your stuff. So I like having people come into your own ecosystem, which is why creating your own products is a great way to go about it, and selling them directly through your podcast or indirectly through, getting people onto an email list from your podcast. That's an amazing way to go about it. Affiliate marketing is huge. I mean, one of the most popular episodes of the SPA podcast was episode 263 as of late, with the founder of Lead Pages, and he came on and provided so much value, Clay Collins. And of course, we mentioned Lead Pages in that episode, and because people are building a relationship not just with me, but with also the founder, the CEO of that company, then because I'm an affiliate, like people are going through my link, right? And so I'm getting paid through affiliate commissions by having stories or people come on to talk about how that product is. I'm not selling the product, but the product gets injected into that conversation naturally. And then finally, there is the PBS model. PBS, public broadcasting system, and that's where you get paid from viewers like you, right? So that's using patreon.com, where you can have your fans, your biggest fans, pledge essentially. Hey, I'm going to pay you $1 every time you come out with a new episode, right? So essentially that's a cup of coffee every month. But you multiply that by 1,000, right? If you have your 1,000 true fans who will pay you $1 only per episode that you come out with, and that's 1 per week, for example, well, you're going to get, if you have 1,000 listeners, $4,000 a month. So that's the PBS model. You don't have to inject advertising into your podcast, but you also make people feel great about supporting you and keeping you going. So that's another thing you could do. Great questions, guys. We talked about, Travis asked, how do you make money from podcasting? Just ads. We just talked about that. Pat, will you replay this session on your website? I would like my wife to watch this too, Scott. For sure. Yeah, absolutely. If you go to, I'll send a link to everybody who's here. But also at the same time, you could likely go to smartpassiveincome.com/podcasting-webinar, which right now is still the registration page. But eventually I'm going to turn that over and show the replay on that link as well. Louis says, thanks for your answer, Pat. You guys are awesome. Thanks for sticking around. Tom says, is it usual to feel intimidated at the thought of starting a podcast? 100%. Feeling you don't have the capacity to captivate the audience. Yes. Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's one of the biggest fears is just, okay, who's going to be there on the other end listening? Like, are they even going to be interested? The truth is, if you don't start a podcast, nobody's going to listen to you, right? Like, that's the first truth. If you're worried about people listening to you, well, you can be sure that nobody will if you don't start. That's number one. Number two is that, yeah, I mean, getting up in front of an audience, whether it's on a digital stage like a podcast or on stage, at an event, I mean, those are the very same feelings, right? But also at the same time, you have to really understand that you have something amazing to provide, whether it's an experience or stories or information. There are people out there who will want to learn from you and the things that you've done, the things that you can help out with, whatever niche it might be. Maybe it's a sub-niche within a sub-niche that you have an expertise in. Maybe it's just you have some amazing life experiences that you could share with other people too that can help them go down a path that they didn't even realize was available. There are people out there who will listen to each and every one of us for who we are, not just the information too, but just for who we are too. Louis says he's enrolling in the course right now. I appreciate that. Thank you for that. PowerUpPodcasting.com is where you want to go for that. And I have a special bonus for those of you who are catching the webinar, by the way, which I'll mention at the end. But again, I want to answer as many questions as possible. Let's see. Teresa is asking about Facebook Live and podcasts. We talked about that already. Mommy Income asks, can you chat about SEO and what strategies help you build the best titles and descriptions? Yeah, I mean, keyword research helps a little bit. There are some great tools that you can use. Let me share these with you. These are some big things that you can take away whether you start a podcast or not. So I'm going to go and share my screen here. Then I'm going to go to answerthepublic.com. This is an amazing website. So select your country. It's actually UK-based. And I'm going to type in knitting. So knitting, what's really cool is I found out that this site uses ConvertKit for capturing emails. So while we wait for the data to come in, what's really cool about this is it'll give you information, actually literally the questions that people are asking about knitting. And here we go. So it gives you the who, what, where, why, when, which, are for all of these. So where to buy knitting yarn in Singapore, where to buy knitting machine, where to buy knitting yarn, where to buy, where is knitting popular, where is knitting daily filmed, how knitting works, how knitting machines work, how knitting helps the brain, how knitting needles are made, how knitting is done, how to knit a sweater, how to knit baby booties, why is knitting and yoga, what? That's a weird one. Why knitting is good, why knitting is fun, why knitting is good for you. All the questions that people are asking about that thing are here. So answerthepublic.com. This is where you should start because, yes, you want to write for humans, right? Not search engines. Well, what are search engines being used by? By humans. So start with the questions that people are asking. And then secondly, Bloomberry. This is another great tool you can use. These are by the founders of BuzzSumo. So I'm going to do the same thing, knitting. And what's really cool about this is this will tell you all the similar questions that people are asking about this particular topic, but specifically where on the web those questions are being asked. So here we go. Do y'all know the diced hose knitting pattern? And that's at X marks the Scot. Does anyone have any good dog sweater knitting patterns at yorkietalk.com? There's all these different questions. There's 10K questions, guys. Here's a bunch of them from Quora.com, Terraform.com. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen here. But how cool is that, right? Answerthepublic.com and also Bloomberry.com. Bloomberry is really cool because you can literally go in and see real questions. You don't have to guess, guys. That's what Will It Fly was made for, so you don't have to guess. But that's what tools like this are made for as well. Bloomberry.com, answerthepublic.com. Cool, guys. I know you got at least something away from this live stream already, even if it's not necessarily podcasting related. Cool. Let's see. What is a good, appropriate way to invite someone to interview when you are just starting out? So, Kevin, one of the best ways to start is with your network or anybody who you might have a relationship already in a sort of second-degree manner or third-degree manner even. That's key because that relationship is going to help just get through that really weird introduction with somebody who you're reaching out to cold. Now, another way to reach out to people is to actually start on social media. One of the best things you can do to actually really get a person's attention is to actually either interact with them on social media or do something that they've taught or mention something that they've shared or have some sort of connection. I think, if it would be very, think about this. If I were to reach out to somebody who was a UC Berkeley grad and ask them, even if I didn't know them at all, it would be a lot easier for them to say yes than if I wasn't a Berkeley grad because we have that thing in common, right? So you can do some research on a person through their website, through their LinkedIn profile, through their Facebook profile, just to see if there's any connections there too. That alone can help get through the weird, who are you kind of, random conversation. Another great tip, I share a bunch of tips like this in the course, but I'm happy to give them to you now. Ask people who are coming out with books or courses. They're going to be more likely to say yes because they're going to want to get in front of more people as possible. And ask people who seem to be going around to many other different podcasts too. But more than that, I want to say that don't worry about getting A-listers on your show. Actually, I would recommend not even doing that right away. I would recommend highlighting, if you have any, the stories and the students that you have. People who are subscribed to your show, your readers, for example, ask them to come on your show. They're going to be more likely to want to say yes. They're going to be more likely to talk you up and make you look great. Just like the last episode of the SPI podcast, I featured 3 success stories from Power Up Podcasting from the beta group. And that just did so much for showing how really, truly, honestly, this course can help people, right? So yeah, there you go. Damien says, is it now or close to becoming a saturated market? Like I talked about earlier, there are 200,000 active podcasts. This is based on HubSpot and 19 million active blogs. So it's not even close yet. I feel now that we're starting to see it go mainstream. A lot of the bigger brands are actually now doing it. But at the same time, I feel like what podcasting is really great for is actually building that one-to-one relationship. So even though CNN and MSNBC or whoever is doing podcasting now, having you become the expert or the authority or the go-to person in a space is still going to be huge because you are building that conversation with people and building that relationship. So no, I don't think it's that. Hey, Luis signed up, enrollment complete. Dude, you're awesome. Wow, I can't believe you did that live here on the call. Thank you for that. You're going to get one of the bonuses that I'll share in just a minute. That's awesome, dude. Thank you so much. Okay, Tyrone says, this course sounds great and I have no doubt that I would enjoy and learn a lot from it. I still have a bit of work to do from Smart from Scratch. Right now, I'm a little intimidated by the thought of doing bi-weekly or monthly episodes and I'm wondering whether this course would help if I wanted to do something more like periodic webinars. The course would help with webinars, but it's not a webinar course, Tyrone. And if you're taking Smart from scratch right now, I would just literally tell you, do not buy Power Up Podcasting. It will be available later in the future, potentially at a higher price. But honestly, it's not anything you need right now. Don't get into the I'm buying courses just because somebody told me to buy it. Like, get in there because it's something that will be helpful. And if you're not quite sure, don't do it. Okay. I know that's kind of weird for people to hear. Like, wow, Pat's telling people not to buy his course. But I want people to buy the course who know that podcasting is right for them. And Tyrone, I'm sure that it's not right for you right now. Webinars and things like that can help too. There's a lot of free information online. Amy Porterfield has some great information on webinars as well. But don't get the course right now because it's not something you need to add on top of everything else you're doing right now. Really focus on validating that idea and that product first. Tim Sweet says, with the viral nature and word of mouth growth of podcasting, do you still need a funnel marketing strategy? Is there a need or a place for a quiz-based marketing push, aka the ask method? Yeah, I mean, think about it. A podcast, you're building a relationship with people, you're hearing a person's thoughts, you're helping them, they're becoming an expert in your eyes, and they tell you, hey, if you want to find out this info, go to this website, and then it's a quiz. Like, yeah, I mean, you should absolutely be thinking about, okay, what happens after a person listens to a podcast episode? Call to actions are really important, but not just like, hey, go back to the website, but what is an actionable thing related to that content that people can do where they can, get a quick result, and a quiz is definitely a great way to do that, but also, how does that start a conversation that can lead to eventually potentially a transaction of some kind? And not a transaction so that you can make money, a transaction so that person, you took them through that journey to realize that you now have the solution for them based on that problem. Does it need to be really expensive to start a podcast, says Amy? No. The equipment that I share with you won't cost you more than like $120, and that's all you need. There are software and things like that out there that you could use too, but there's a lot of free ones too, which I recommend, and I share and give you tutorials on the course on how to do that. Sorry, I just lost my train of thought here because I saw Tim said he signed up or is going to sign up. Thank you for that. Hosting. You need audio hosting. Yes, you could host your audio on your own website's host, but I wouldn't recommend doing that because you want it to be there where a place it's going to be streamed perfectly, where even if your website were to go down, your audio downloads are still going to be fine because iTunes pulls from your feeds from your host, not your website. Sheena says, I also wanted to know about marketing again and the message out there about my podcast. Yeah, I mean, it's hard to talk about in just a short time period here. And we're already coming up to the hour, and I'm going to be around for a lot longer, guys. So I know I said we're only going to be around for an hour. I will at the hour tell you about the offer though, and the bonus, just so that those of you who have to leave, you can leave, and you don't have to worry about wondering what's going on. But I will say that there's a lot of information there about the marketing of your show, from of a specific plan of everything that happens on launch week, 7 days leading up to your show, what happens on launch day. So utilizing your network is a smart thing to do. Utilizing an email list to build buzz, and even a launch team, for example. There's a lot that goes along with it, but there's a lot of information there. Amy says, starting to feel nervous and excited. That nervousness is excitement. It's nerves because you are embarking on a journey that you've never gone down before, which is a sign that not only is it exciting, but it's also a sign that it's something that is going to be meaningful to you. There's always something amazing on the other end of that nervousness, right? Now, there's different kinds of nervousness, right? There's like, hey, you're standing on the edge of a cliff. You're nervous because you might die if you take a step forward, right? But we have those same internal feelings when we are doing things like, hey, maybe I should start a podcast, or maybe I can get up on stage and talk to people. But of course, you're not going to die doing that. Where are those nerves coming from? It's because it's just an unnatural thing. It's an uncommon thing that you've never experienced before. But in those situations, there's always likely something amazing on the other end. As Stephen Pressfield from The War of Art says, that self-doubt, that nervousness is essentially a sign that there's, that's what you should be doing. It's your brain saying, yeah, that's what I should be doing. So that's pretty cool, Amy. Let's see. Natalie says, do you survey your listeners to find out which topics they want to hear about? Yes, absolutely. You can survey them in many different ways. You can literally just ask them on social media, which is probably the quickest way to do it. You can use those tools like I mentioned earlier, like Bloomberry and Answer the Public. You can also have conversations with them. I typically have Skype conversations with my audience every month with at least 10 people. I reach out to my email list randomly and want to have phone conversations with them. So we get on Skype. This literally happens every single month. I get on Skype with 10 of my subscribers. We just talk, and that's an amazing way to just really learn about who it is in my audience that I'm serving, what their story is about, what I can do better, all those kinds of things. But the other great way is in your email list, when you get people to subscribe to your email list, have one of the first emails be, hey, what are you struggling with right now? And you actually want to reply back. Have those replies go into a specific folder in your Gmail, or just tag them so that you can collect them all at once. And that way you're going to get automatically answer or questions that come in that you can then answer on your podcast. Or, you might find a pattern of the one thing that everybody's asking about that could potentially become a product too. Joseph says, what do you think about comedy podcasts? That's something I would never do because I don't feel like I have the skill to create a comedy podcast. And I definitely respect those who can do that. But yeah, a comedy podcast is great. People are listening on the go and they're getting entertained. I mean, entertaining solves one of those problems of boredom, right? And so if you can provide that entertainment, Joe Rogan, I mean, there's a number of other comedy-related podcasts out there that are fantastic, right? And if you can get those listeners who are passionate, I mean, you're going to get people who would love to potentially watch you at a comedy club one day, or go out and meet you at a coffee shop and just talk. So, building an audience that way is amazing. Do I need to launch a blog or website first? Gio, it's essentially the same thing. So your blog and your website, they're all in one, and that can be there to help support your podcast. Anonymous asks, do you have any difficulty maintaining a sense of privacy as you have become more recognizable? Interesting question. No, not really. What's nice with this sort of podcasting quote fame, or this online fame, is that I still go to the store and I don't get recognized. I mean, it's happened a few times. Where it gets crazy is when I go to conferences and people who have listened to my show or who read my blog, they see me. I want them to come and talk to me, and it becomes crazy, but crazy in a good way. I'll often spend 3 or 4 hours after a talk just in the hallways, speaking to everybody, shaking people's hands, thanking them. And I love that. I absolutely love that. But then I go back into my hotel room and I'm like, because I'm not used to that, and I'm an introvert. But I also know that that's just a sign that what I'm doing is really helping people and making an impact. John says, is there a preferred time frame for a podcast show? Your show should be as long as it needs to be to do what you want it to do. You shouldn't try to make it 30 minutes exactly, for example, because what if you do an interview and it just is so great? Are you going to say, sorry, I know you're great at what you do, but I'm just going to have to cut us off because we're out of time? No. Or if it's like 30 minutes, but you only have 10 minutes of content, and you're like, are you going to stretch that out and like make people bored or just add fluff? No. So it's as long as it needs to be. Travis asks, what's more popular, interview podcast, or are you talking on a topic alone as an expert? So for me, I do both, and you can choose to do one or the other or a mix of both in your show. I like doing both because I can come in at an expert angle with the topic and talk about an experience and share my own stories without having a guest on the other end. But I also like having guests too, because not only am I building a relationship with that guest, but also I'm able to kind of take their expert knowledge and give it to my audience too, which is great. So there are pros and cons to each. Which ones are more popular? I've had popular episodes of both types. Reef Dude says, what is the best way to promote a newly started podcast and kick it off? I have about 2K subs on YouTube, but what else can be done to promote and build a following with podcasts? So here's a tip. This is like one of those all-star tips I'm going to give you before I talk about the offer really quick and then go back into questions. Interview a forum owner. What is a forum owner? Okay, let's do this live demo right now. So this should help everybody. And if you do videos or blog interviews too, this will help. But I'm going to share my screen here. We're going to go to Facebook. You can go to LinkedIn too. I'll show you LinkedIn in just a moment. But we're going to look up knitting is our example for whatever reason. I'm going to look up groups. And look, Knitting Uncensored, 3,823 members. Knitting Patterns, 2,194 members. Addicted to Sock Knitting, 18,045 members. Okay, I'm going to go here into sock knitting. I have a friend that's in there. Here's who I want to reach out to: Jackie Timmons, Jennifer, Laurel, and Deborah. I'm going to message them on. I'm going to message them through Facebook. Say, hey, I have a podcast about knitting. I would love to interview you for the show and talk about your knitting group and talk about how you got started. What do you say? In most cases, these aren't the A-listers that are getting asked to do podcasts all the time, so more likely they are going to say yes. Secondly, do you think there's a chance that that person, when they are featured and the hero of the story of your podcast, do you think there's a chance that they're going to share that podcast with their 18,045 members? Boom. Mic drop. Do that. Let me show you LinkedIn. And the people who have actually taken action and done that have said that alone, that strategy alone, has been the number one thing that has helped grow in their show. So same thing with here. I don't know if there's any knitting groups in LinkedIn, but let's see. Circular sewing, knitting. Actually, we want to look at groups. Here we go. The Knitting Club. Here we go. Knitting industry. So these are probably business owners in the knitting industry. 5,077 members. Boom. Billy Hunter, group owner, publisher of leading textile industry, something or other. Now, you're going to have to ask to join, but you don't need to join. Oh, interesting. This shows less members, so it's a conflict, but still a lot, right? I'm going to reach out to Billy Hunter and be like, hey, Billy, I have a podcast about knitting, and I'd love to talk about your work in the knitting industry and future you, and I just want to learn more about you. Boom. Right? It sounds obvious when you hear it, but it is such a good strategy, and it makes sense, right? And do you think that this person may end up sharing that podcast to their audience? Absolutely. Hey, by the way, Billy, I have a free PDF file for people who are doing live videos on Facebook for the knitting industry. Like, I would love to just give this to all of your members for free. Boom. Okay. Question here. Where do you get this? PBSimpact.com. So just really quick, PBSimpact.com. You can get a mic flag like this, impactpbs.com. So that's the website where you can get like these little, they're called mic flags, which is really cool. And it doesn't seem to be loading as quick as I wanted to. There you go. So you can get mic flags like that there. And you just upload your, screen share. Did you guys see me go through LinkedIn? I totally did the LinkedIn example, but I forgot. Did you guys see that? I'm a little bit frazzled right now. Anyway, Impact PBS. Okay, you saw LinkedIn. Great. Cool. So good stuff, guys. It is the hour right now, so I'm going to tell you really quick about Power Up Podcasting. I'm not going to go too deep into it because I think y'all have heard about it, and I'm not here to just drill it into your head until you're sick of it anymore. That's the last thing I want to do. So really quick, poweruppodcasting.com. It's my course to help you literally hold your hand through the entire process. As you can see, actually, let me go back. Here's what the course content looks like. If you scroll down all the way to the bottom of the sales page here, poweruppodcasting.com is a place to go. It takes you through pre-launch. So you and your podcast, this is sort of like the planning place. We talk about the podcast equipment. You get that ordered. So by the time you're ready to record, it's coming your way. Your show details, what your show's going to be about, getting your artwork done and stuff, which a lot of people are already sharing here in the Power Up Podcasting group already, which is from new students too. Like, we haven't even closed the cart, and look at this. The couples therapist couch, Carlos with the LinkedIn doctor, epicdads.net. Like, so cool that people are already taking action there. Oh, thank you. Not sharing my screen. So I was taking you through the course curriculum here really quick. So the pre-launch phase is happening right now. And this is step one, and it's where we go over your equipment and how podcasting works and just some of the roadblocks that you might go through, podcasting artwork. And like I was showing, people are already uploading their artwork. These are brand new students who just came in this week. They're already uploading their artwork and already taking action, which is really cool. This is a student center, which you also get lifetime access to as well. There's also office hours with me. We have 8 office hours, just like this Zoom, you and me, planned for the next month so that you can get your questions answered just like this, specifically about your show too. So to keep going, step 2 is like planning your podcast episodes. The first one was like planning your show. The second one's planning your episodes. So really getting into your editorial calendar. What are your shows going to be about? Who should you interview and why? Then step 3 is like recording and editing your show. I walk you through that whole process with the software, getting everything set up, how to tag your shows, how to get them uploaded into iTunes, all that stuff. Understand your hosting company. Now, I don't want you to be intimidated by all these lessons. These videos in each of these lessons are like 3 to 5 minutes average. So don't worry about that too much. Some are a little bit longer, like when I walk you through how to edit your show and stuff, but I walk you through step by step, no problem. Then the launch plan. This is the final step of pre-launch. This is where we create your launch execution plan for launch week, which is this section here. And we go through every single day, 7 days up until your launch day. Then there's the post-launch planning stuff, which is like, how do you read your stats? How do you plan out your future episodes? How do you create templates so that's just easier for you down the road? How to stay consistent, all that kind of stuff, what to do from here. There's some bonus stuff too. I've done some presentations at podcasting events. I have those just put in here so I can help you. with building your community, growing your email list, and of course, an entire bonus section on monetization. And then office hours information here too, which will have recordings of all the office hours we do in case we miss it. Again, you get access to the course too. And that's that. So here's the special offer I want to give you guys, because I want to just breeze over this and make sure that you all get some of your questions answered as we go along. So here we go. Wait, where was I? Oh, so here's the offer I want to give you. So poweruppodcasting.com is where you go. The doors close after Monday, so after tomorrow, midnight tomorrow. But there's a special webinar bonus. Now, I offer the same bonus to the people who are on the wait list. And actually, I had a few spots left over. I wanted to do just a certain amount of these because I can only do so many. But not as many people signed up from the waitlist as I thought that was possible. So I wanted to open this up again. Again, this isn't something that I'm blasting out to my entire email list. And I just reopened this just for the people who are watching this webinar or the webinar replay. And this is only available until the end of today. So you don't have to like buy before the end of this call. I hate when you're pressured to do that. But I'm going to give you till the end of the day to decide if you want this course and along with this bonus. And that bonus is when your first episodes come out, I'm going to listen to one of them. And I'm going to critique your audio and give you a short audit to help you improve your show moving forward. That's something I wish I had when I first started, and I know that just a few tips in the beginning can help with that trajectory moving forward. So poweruppodcasting.com is where you go. That'll take you to the sales page. You can also watch some of the testimonials there as well. There's Dr. Shannon Irvine, and then there's Perry Tinsley somewhere on this page as well, who has a show, Power Blast. He talks about the course too. I'm not going to just go into depth with that, but again, poweruppodcasting.com, special webinar bonus, only available till today. And there you go. Cool, guys. Okay, let's get back to your questions here, because that's the real reason why we're here. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen. But one more time, poweruppodcasting.com. Cool. Power Up Podcasting. Thanks, MJ. I appreciate that. See, this is what happens when I talk fast. I mumble. But yeah, very cool. Excellent outline. Very cool. Okay, let's get back into the questions, guys, because this is a lot of fun. I'm going to try to get to as many as I can. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to tell you that, some of you might have to leave. And again, poweruppodcasting.com is where you want to go to get the course. But I'm going to stick around and answer as many questions as I can for the next hour. So if you have to leave, that's totally fine. This is being recorded, so you can come back and watch later. But also at the same time, I am going to just get through many of them. I mean, there's over 150 open questions, so I'm going to get through as many as I can quickly. And I also have to make sure that I have lunch and my wife is cool and stuff, because I told her I was only going to go for an hour. But kids are at grandma's. They'll be cool. My wife will be fine. And we're all here together, and you took the time today. And of course, if you have a pressing question that I don't answer in this call, feel free to reach out to me. Actually, on the sales page too, there's an intercom. If you go to the sales page, on the bottom, there's a little chat icon. You can just ask questions there too, so I can answer them for you as well. Joaquin says, how do you estimate the hours a week podcasting will demand? Well, it decreases over time. In the beginning, of course, as you're setting things up, it's going to take a little bit longer, right? But for me, for example, I can tell you that with my show, Ask Pat, which takes, every episode is an average of 10 minutes of me recording. So every episode's 10 minutes. I batch process them. So I can record 5 within an hour. And literally, because I have the system set up, it only takes me less than an hour to record a full week's worth of episodes. So that's 5 episodes within an hour, because I send those files off and I have somebody else edit them, right? In the beginning, I edited them myself, and that added an additional, for example, hour per episode, which then became a half hour. And then I had the systems in place. And it didn't take me very long. In the beginning, you're going to find it's going to take a little bit longer, especially because you're not used to being behind the mic. You might mess up. It's another tip. When you are recording, don't stop recording. Just keep recording. And then one thing you can do while you're editing is doing this little click, or like a clap, something like that, so that in the file, when you go back and look at the waveforms, you know that click, which you usually see with a large vertical line, is where you messed up. And you can go back and just take that part out and smush those 2 pieces together to make it one cohesive episode. Amy says, do we need to do podcasts every day? No. Sorry. Ask Pat is a show I do every day, but you don't need to do one every day. Actually, I wouldn't even recommend doing it. John Lee Dumas does it every day, but most people do not. Once a week, or sometimes people do it twice a week, or sometimes people do it twice a month. When I started out, I did one every other week, and it got so much great feedback. I was able to build an audience that way. And then once I finally realized the power of podcasting, I switched it to 1 per week. So no, you don't have to do every day, but it is possible. And there are systems in place that you can make happen so that if you wanted to, you could go every day, no problem. Okay, let's see. SoundCloud versus Libsyn for podcasts, asks Stray. I talk about podcasting hosts in the course, but I will tell you that I would recommend Libsyn over SoundCloud. SoundCloud has had some financial issues recently in the past, and so I'm just very weary about recommending SoundCloud. Even though it's a great platform, they're not primarily built for podcasting, right? They're built for people who do music, right? And so that's not their primary focus. Libsyn, that's their primary focus, is helping you start your podcast. Hardcore history is one every 100 days, says Joaquin. Nice. Mommy Income says, how far out do you record your content? We have a few months recorded, but are wondering how to deal with things that pop up that we want to talk about in between. We don't want to wait until 2 months down the road. Yeah, I mean, it's up to you. It's going to take a while to figure out what your rhythm is. We record once, we record 2 months in advance, and that's a lot, right? And things do come up. And what's nice is if you have your editorial calendar in place, and I do give you access to a spreadsheet. Actually, my very spreadsheet you get access to, it's blank, but you can move it around. What's really nice is you can then move things around and shift as you need to. So one thing I like to do, just as a sort of a little bit more detailed but side tip for you, Mommy Income, is I'll record the episode or the interview ahead of time, but I won't record the intro or the outro until later. And that way, if I have to move it around or bump it up a little bit or move it back, I wouldn't have to re-record the intro knowing what number it is, because that number may be redefined later. So Chip says, what are your thoughts about having a standard set of questions with a few random questions thrown in versus all the random based upon the flow of the podcast? So my preference, Chip, is that questions will come as you come up with them. I am not a big fan of the shows that have the same questions over and over and over again. And I know there's some benefit to doing that. As a podcaster, it's really easy to create, right? But then at the same time, as a podcaster, then it's like you could be replaced. And I feel like the answers that you get back are going to be surface level answers. The goal that comes in with storytelling and digging deep with interviewers come with the follow-up questions that aren't scripted, right? And you're essentially just having a conversation. So I would recommend maybe having a couple set questions that you always ask, but having most of the questions be ones that you come up on the fly. And yes, that's a little scary, but here's the thing. When you talk to somebody in person, do you come at them with a certain set of questions, like at a conference or like with your friends? Do you go to your friend's house and say, hey guys, I've just been wondering, number one, how was your day? Number two, what did you have for dinner last night with your husband? Number three, no, you don't do that, right? Like that's completely unnatural. So I don't do that with my episodes. I don't recommend other people do that because that's not a real conversation. Di says, haha. Okay. Lee says, it's necessary to have a blog to go along with your podcast. No, not necessary technically, but I feel like it is something you should absolutely have so that you can have a place where people can come back. Now, if you mean blog by, should I also have written content on that website? Then not necessarily. Having a blog is smart because you definitely gain access to SEO and Google search and such like that. Because Google's not listening to your podcast episodes, which is why transcribing is really important. There's a whole chapter and lesson on transcriptions and tools that you can use to do that in the course. But is it necessary to have a blog? No, but should you? Yes. At least the website. Paul says, have signed up for Libsyn. I like it. About to upload my first podcast. Congrats. How do I choose what goes into LinkedIn? Looks like I can choose content for other destinations, but not for LinkedIn. Not exactly sure what you mean, Paul. I mean, what I would do with LinkedIn is I would just take the link of that episode once it goes live and then push it out as a link, not automated, but actually put some custom information in there along with that link in your LinkedIn profile as your status update. Gary says, I want my podcast, Pow Music Podcast, to cover creativity, lifestyle, and music education, but I'm wondering if I should focus on one of those things instead of everything. But I want to be true to me, and I'm interested in discussing all of those things. I always hear niche down. You know, niching down is important, but definitely per episode you should niche down. What I would do, Gary, is just have your podcast come out, talk about these different topics, and then over time you're able to gauge which ones seem to be more interesting to people. And then you can sort of create a rhythm. I met somebody who was a photographer the other day who's coming out with a podcast. We talked about that earlier, how that can be done. It can be done very well. He has a show where he talks about like just stories related to photos and being a photographer, but he wanted to add in the element of, okay, the business aspect of podcast, of photography. So he asked me, hey, do you think I should just add that into my current episodes, or should I create a whole different show about that, or should I add that as a different a different episode in the same week so people can choose between one or another? And I said, hey, test it out. You've been doing this other one that's just photography story based for a while. Do one episode that's on business. Tell people that you're thinking about doing it more often and how they would, literally ask them how they would best, want to get that. I feel like that the most important thing with your podcast is it should be a reflection of you. But at the same time, you have to take into account what it is that people are going to be really wanting to hear about and what that demand is. So what I would do, Gary, is to just start out talking about all these different topics, not all in the same episode, right? Like have episodes specific to each of these different things. And then over time, you can start to collect feedback and see based on the numbers, based on emails or messages that are coming in, which ones seem to be the most resonant with your audience. Louisa says, I have to go. Thanks, Louisa. Appreciate you being here. Air Potter says, what are top 5 challenges to overcome to launch successfully? So number 1, getting started. Number 2, understanding what it is you're going to talk about when you get on your show. Number 3, the fear of putting yourself out there and getting vulnerable and knowing that people are going to listen to you and they might have something to say back in one way or another. Number 4, the technical aspect for sure. Number 5, having your voice be heard. Like you are just not a fan of your own voice. That's a big hurdle for people too. Jeff Lightfoot says, I love the idea of podcasting in general, but don't love the technical side. Do you recommend outsourcing for editing and post-production steps? If so, any tips on how to go about doing this? Absolutely. You can edit yourself or have other people edit your show for you, Jeff. I would recommend you go through the process yourself. I walk you through the process in the course. I walk you through the process in my free podcasting tutorial too, because that's really mostly just about setting it up and the technical stuff. It doesn't have all the other stuff that goes along with the course, but what I would say is get it done yourself just so you know what that process is like. I think it's really important for you all when you're outsourcing something to try it yourself first, right? Unless it's something you don't know how to do at all or that you just absolutely hate. I think for something like this, for example, it's really important for you to do it at least once or twice yourself first just to see all that's involved. Because A, you're going to appreciate it more when you have somebody else on the other end doing it, but B, you could make sure it's done your way. In the way that you want to do it. I think that's a big challenge with outsourcing is you hand something over to somebody and you don't even know what's happening. I think it's important for you to, when you hand off something, to literally have, hey, here are the steps that you need to take. Here's what you should do. And there you go. And that way you know it's done in your way. So what I would do is get it done yourself, create a procedure list or SOP, standard operating procedure, and then you can hand it off, and then you can just worry about the recording. I think ideally that's where we all want to go, right? To a point where you have some money coming in that you can hand off to somebody else to make sure they edit your show so that you can just focus on the recording and the marketing. You guys are awesome, by the way. Thank you so much. Simmons says, hey, Pat, couple of questions. I'm launching a podcast on career advice and interviewing skills. I'm in corporate HR and have industry friends to jump to give the best advice to you. 2 questions. What do you think of interview hire as a name and how many episodes recorded before launching? So when going live, you'll hear me talk about this in the course. We give you a whole launch execution plan, but I would recommend going live with 3 at least and having the same amount already recorded in the bag. So 5 to 6 episodes already recorded. Go live with 3. That way, the first day, people are listening to more than one episode. You're going to get more chances to get a call to action, to get people's email addresses, to get a subscriber. One episode in particular might resonate with a person more than another. That way, you have 3 different chances, essentially, to really resonate with people. So launching with multiple episodes is smart, something I did not do myself. And then finally, to your other question, to the name of the podcast, it's hard to know. I'd want to do research first. And, research on Google, research on iTunes, just to see what else is out there already. So I can't necessarily answer that right now. Dory says, great QA, signing up for the course. Excited to get started. Thank you, Dory. That's awesome. Looking forward to seeing you there and welcoming you into the group and seeing you in the Student Center. Y says, different ways that pay in podcasting other than advertisers during the show. So I answered that question earlier, but just as a recap, sell your own products. I wouldn't recommend selling directly on your show. Like, hey, guys, I have this course. Buy it now. I would say, hey, guys, I have this course, but before you get to that, here's a free download for you to just make sure, just like this cheat sheet, right, that we talked about, which I'll get into in just a minute. I forgot to talk about that. There's selling your own stuff, selling other people's stuff as an affiliate, and also the sort of Patreon PBS model. All right. Steve says, hey, Pat, how often do you do a podcast? So I have the Ask Pat podcast, which is sort of an anomaly. It comes out 5 days a week. But again, like I said, I batch process. It takes me 1 hour to record a whole weeks worth of episodes, meaning it only takes me a half a day to record the entire month's worth of episodes. And here's the thing, because I have advertisers that pay to be on that show as well, I'm making anywhere between $200 and $400 per episode. So in a single month, I can make, anywhere between $4,000 to $6,000 with just a half day's worth of work. Now, of course, it's not going to be like that for most people in the beginning, and I do have a rather large audience, but even a fraction of that can be a huge deal breaker or a difference maker in what you're doing. So there you go. With the Smart Passive Income podcast, that comes out once a week. With the One Day Business Breakthrough podcast with myself and Chris Ducker, we come out with a new season every few months, and we just literally take 2 days, a couple hours each night. He's in the Philippines, I'm in the US. We record conversations on Skype. We chunk them up, put them into different episodes, and then we do a Netflix model, put them all out at the same time for a season. And that's something that I haven't experimented with until very recently. So I wouldn't recommend doing that quite yet. Some people do that. Depends on what kind of show you have, but there you go. Amy says, do you talk about how to make money with your podcast? Yes, absolutely. There's a whole section on here. I'll share my screen right now just so you can see it. There's a whole section in the course. You scroll down, you'll see the curriculum here. And again, these videos aren't very long. There's just a lot of them so that you can walk through the process step by step. Bonus section here, podcast monetization, introduction, advertising and sponsorships, selling your own stuff, monetization, and the PBS model, all things that I already talked about. So Abby says, I would love to start, but I'm unsure of what angle to take. How would I make it different from my blog content? I teach moms to monetize their blogs. Very cool. So there's a number of different ways you can do that. Some of the first lessons in the course talk about how to stand out and the position that you should take. One thing I would recommend doing is actually, I'm going to pull from my book, Will It Fly, and have you create a market map. This is something you all should be doing, and that is creating your market map. And a market map is a way for you to get an understanding of what's out there so you can find your position in that space. So the way that you do that is you do research on the 3 Ps. So those 3 Ps are the places that your target audience exists. So where else besides your site does your target audience exist? List those out, like literally put them in a spreadsheet. The second P are the people. Who are the influencers and the trusted advisors, the podcast hosts, the forum group owners who already have, Adnan says, great content. We'll listen to the rest later. See you, Adnan. We're doing good, guys. By the way, another tip when you're podcasting, drink lots of water, which is just good for your health anyway, right? But the second P is the people, right? List all the people who already have trust with that particular audience. And the third P is the products. List all the products that are being offered to and being sold to that particular audience. You can find them on Amazon, on those other people's sites. And just that exercise alone will give you a nice overview of the map of that space that you're in, right? And what do you do with the map? You navigate through it so you can find your fourth P, and that's your position. So through all that information, you're going to see, okay, well, here's something that's underutilized, or here's something that there seems to be a lot of talk and chatter about, or here are some products that there seem to be more of these than any others. Why? It gives you just a good understanding of what's going on. So that's what I would recommend doing. And that way you can find your position. Another thing you can do is actually, if you have blog readers already, you can survey them and ask them what kinds of things they would like to hear about. It's a very, very great exercise to get people excited about your upcoming show, is to actually engage the audience you already have, asking them questions about how they might influence your podcast, which is great. They're going to feel like they're a part of it, and they're going to be more likely to listen to your show. And it's just an excuse for you to start talking about it and get people excited about it, right? Do you need an audience before you start a podcast? Not necessarily. Actually, there are a lot of people who've gone through the course starting from scratch, and they now have an audience as a result. Amy says, my business is Capable, Confident Women. Love that. I have an idea of what I want to call it. However, if I use the word conversation, I'm only one talking. Is that still doable? A solo episode is a conversation. It's a conversation between you and your audience. I think that's actually a really smart thing. So if you don't want to do interviews, which I would encourage most people to do them, because you get in front of another person's audience, you get them to bring their expertise on the show, you get to build that relationship with that person, which is huge. It's much easier to have a person say yes to a 30-minute conversation if they're going on your show versus just, hey, person, can I talk to you for 30 minutes and pick your brain? No. So I think calling it a conversation is smart, even if it's just you doing the show. I think that's gold, actually, because people are going to feel like they are having this conversation with you. And it also becomes an open invite for them to have a conversation with you later, or to interact with you on social media, for example. So Tom asks, how much does it cost to start a podcast? Okay, so to break down the equipment that I talk about in the show, or in the course, the microphone, the the stand and the shock mount, which I feel like is a really important underrated piece of equipment, because this shock mount suspends the microphone on these sort of rubber bands so that any vibrations, I mean, you can hear it because you're hearing it, but any vibrations that happen get absorbed in these rubber bands. And because the mic is floating, you don't hear those things. And mics are very powerful and they can pick up a lot of that stuff. So that helps. But, with all that equipment, $120 and then hosting, $10 a month, and that's it. That's it to start. And you don't need much more than that. Squarespace versus WordPress for a website. I prefer WordPress just because there's so many more options and customization options out there and help for your website. But Squarespace I know is great too. Purpose Girl says, what is your recommended length of a podcast episode? My thought is between 20 and 45 minutes. An hour feels too long and people feel like they don't have time for it and you lose your audience. If it's less than 20 minutes, it's not worth setting aside the time to listen while washing dishes, driving, running, etc. What do you think? Personally, I feel the length of your episode should be as long as you want it to be to deliver the content that you want to deliver. So it could vary. My episodes vary between 30 minutes and sometimes over an hour. And I was worried too in the beginning. Here's what I did when I first started. I was like, hey guys, I'm gonna have every episode be 22 and a half minutes because that's how long a television episode is. And they've done all the research and know exactly the attention and time span. And then I did my first interview and we were at 22 minutes and I was like, I can't stop this because this is gold. And why would I disservice my audience by cutting it off now, right? You'd be surprised about how long people listen for. We had a question that was mentioned earlier was just how long do you listen per episode? And people were saying anywhere between 10 minutes and sometimes 2 hours. Some episodes are 2 hours in length, which is crazy, but not crazy also at the same time. And then the other thing, I have a show, Ask Pat, that's 10 minutes in length. And I have the Smart Passive Income podcast. Some people only listen to Ask Pat because their commute is only 10 minutes. So there's a lot of things, related to that question to think about. But for me, it's whatever it is that you're trying to transform your audience with, it needs to be that long. So however long it needs to tell that story, tell those case studies, to have that person interview enough for them to really give that information to your audience. That's how long it should be. Let's see. Do I need sponsors first? Do I need to join a network? Example, Loudspeaker Network. No, you don't need to join a network. And first of all, it's also very difficult to get sponsors right off the bat. You need to be podcasting, I would say, for at least 6 weeks and get some data coming in to understand, okay, what are those numbers like before even engaging with one of those podcast advertising networks. Some of them don't even start talking to people until you have $50,000 per episode. But here's the thing. Don't let that scare you. Or $50,000 per month, not per episode. But still, that's a lot. But you don't need that many downloads to have a personal conversation or a one-to-one conversation, not going through a third-party company, but going directly to a company that perhaps you already work with. Or maybe there's a product that you already talk about on your show. Maybe they could, or you talk about on your podcast, maybe they could be on your podcast and provide you a little bit of income as a result of that. Just make sure that whatever that relationship is, you're always disclosing that. So if you are an affiliate for a company, you're disclosing that. Just like I said with lead pages, and I'll say that also as well with Libsyn and whatnot. But at the same time, I mean, if that company knows you have a targeted audience and that you use their product, they're going to be more likely to say yes, even closer to the start of your show. Terry here in the chat says, do you track the big names by existing in the podcast, or is there another way to get access to them? If they're coming out with a book, they're going to be more likely to say yes, even to beginner shows. If you are a star student of theirs, they're going to be more likely to say yes to coming on your show. The sort of like a teacher's pet thing. And then also, name dropping. If you've interviewed some people and those are big names already, you can name drop to have other people say, oh, well, you interviewed Tim Ferriss. Well, totally, I'd love to be on your show. But I also would say, hey, don't always try to go for the A-listers. Some of those episodes, actually, the more popular episodes on SPI that I feel have the most impact on people are not the ones with Gary Vaynerchuk and Tim Ferriss. They're the ones with people in my audience who have taken action. They're the ones like with Shane and Jocelyn Sams, episode 122, who were just two people from Kentucky, two teachers who listened to my show and then now have built $1 million businesses. And that speaks so much more to people than like a person who's just like in the stratosphere. Paula says, iTunes, could you explain? Getting your show up on iTunes gives you direct access to millions of people who are subscribing to podcasts every day, millions of listeners. And if you have a show and they find it, they're going to be listening to you. Chris says, for longevity of the life of a podcast, is it better to do a weekly or bi-weekly episodes? Doesn't matter. as long as you're coming out with episodes, they can live on for sure. So whatever rhythm is good for you at the start, do that, and you can always change. That's the other cool thing. You can always keep going and change things up. I mean, I went from bi-weekly to weekly. I've even done episodes a couple times, twice a week, and you can always change things up. Dr. Huntley says, I've got to run. Thanks a million for this. It was awesome. Have a blessed day. You too, Mr. Huntley. Thanks so much. Excuse me. Whew. I was only planning on going for an hour. We're going much longer. Ugh. Guys, thanks for sticking with me. We're going to go for another half hour here. By the way, I have something really cool to show you. Can you guys see that? This is a smart passive income pin. Something I'm going to be implementing in my brand very soon is every course is going to have its own pin. You'll also see the smart passive income one. Every special event that I put together is going to have its own pin. And I'm going to have lanyards made so that when people go to conferences, it'll essentially be your ticket into a special meetup. Or it's going to be a way for you to connect with other people knowing that, like, hey, you took Power Up Podcasting too? Let's talk. Tell me about your podcast. I think it'd be really cool. Where do I get these made? I don't know. My assistant Jessica put them together and got them made. They look really cool. I can't stop looking at this and how cool it is. Come on, focus. There it is. But it's just one of those things that I'm experimenting with to how to better bring this community together. I think these courses have done a great job of doing that. There's already 200 plus people in the Power Up Podcasting course who are all podcasters, right? And they're all talking and getting to know each other. Some of them are getting invites on other people's shows already too. It's just really cool. So I think with all the live events that I'll be doing later on and just more people going to live events in general, it's another level of getting people to just find each other and build that community, which is really cool. Louis says, podcasting diplomas. I know a lot of courses who do that, actually, and I think there's something to be said there, Louis. I really love that idea. Tyrone says, got to head out. Thanks for the great Q&A. Very helpful. Cool. Okay, guys, let's go for another half hour here, and then we'll close it up. And again, as a reminder, just so you can all remember, in case you haven't seen it already, poweruppodcasting.com, guys. The doors close tomorrow, and tonight is tonight the bonus for those of you who are watching live right now. It's going to end. So when your first episode comes out, I'm going to listen to it and critique it and give you some tips for you to help you improve it moving forward. And that's only available to the webinar peeps today. So by the end of today, that bonus will close. I'm not going to offer that to anybody else after tonight. And the reason it's not being blasted out there to everybody is because that's a lot of time for me. But I also know how important that is. And you guys seem to be the action takers, which is why I wanted to offer this one more time to you guys. So the people on the wait list got access to this, but now also the people on the webinar, because I have a few spots open. So poweruppodcasting.com, and I look forward to seeing you in there. So when you sign up for the course, when your first episodes come out, email me. I'm going to put that in the email that I'll send you later in terms of instructions on how to redeem that. But email me when your first episodes come out, drop me a link, and I'll listen to it and give you some feedback. Okay. What's really cool is a lot of these questions that are coming in now that I've already answered. Okay, so Y says, why are you promoting podcasting? What is the advantage in having more people in that industry? A podcast is the most amazing way to connect with your audience. I've seen it firsthand. I've seen it with the students that I've taught. It has changed my life. It has changed the lives of those who have listened to my show on the other end. And there is no other content medium that allows you to get in front of an audience in places that other content mediums cannot. Like when people are on the go, when people are at the gym, when people are on a plane. Just the way podcasting works and how very little there are still, I feel like it's the number one way to start to build an audience if you don't have one already, or the number one way to build your audience as well. Cheryl has to head out. Thanks for coming, Cheryl. Appreciate it. All right, Doug, can you talk more about why it's important to have a launch event for your podcast? Thanks, Pant. Yeah. So why is it important to have a launch event? Well, you don't necessarily need to have an event per se, like you get people to buy tickets and you have like a party or anything. That's not what I mean by an event. Think about an event that you put on that were to be like a workshop or something in person, right? How would you promote that event? Would you just set up that event and then go into that room when it's time to start the event and then tell people about it? No, you would tell people about it beforehand. You would let people know this is where they need to be. You would hype people up. You would get people excited. Oh man, I'm sorry about my voice. Again, I only had planned to go for an hour and we're going for 2 today. And I recorded about 3 hours of episodes yesterday. Woo, so I'm definitely feeling it. Anyway, so I'm going to take it a little bit slower, Doug. So why it's important to have a launch event? It's so that people will know your show exists. Easy. Melanie says, should we keep cough drops near for cough fits? So a few things related to that. It is an endurance game a little bit to, and as you podcast more, you're going to get to see that, your voice is going to get a lot stronger over time. I go to conferences now and I don't lose my voice anymore. Podcasting has helped for that. I also got so serious about podcasting that I took voice lessons to help me better prepare. And that has all been really helpful. Cough drops can help. Just drinking lots of water. I feel like I'm partly parched because it's early in the morning. I usually do my podcasting later in the day after I've had lunch and after I've had a lot of liquids. Green tea with lemon, warm, not hot, says Joaquin. I public speak and used to ring announce for boxing matches. My tip to keep your vocal cords lubed, try black coffee with fresh black pepper. Black pepper and black coffee. That sounds crazy, but I'm going to try that, Tim. Thank you. Stephanie says, do you have any tips on how to approach people if you'd like to feature as a guest? So if you want to be a guest on another person's show, the number one way to do that is to build a relationship with them first and truly understand what value you can provide for their podcast. I would actually do some research on their existing lot of shows and determining what is missing that you can actually come and provide information for. I will typically be more likely to say yes. I don't always say yes, and actually most of the time I say no. But I'm more likely to say yes if I know a person has taken the time to understand what it is that they can add in terms of value for my audience. Not for me, my audience. That's what's most important. And so I can see that they've gone through my episode archive and have determined and even have listened to a couple episodes and feel like, oh, maybe there's something missing here that they can add. I will definitely be more likely to say yes if that's the case. So Reef Dude says, what software platform do you recommend for recording remote audio and video with a remote co-host? I was thinking of posting video to YouTube, to audio, and audio to iTunes. So recording audio with a remote co-host, I mean, Skype, I feel is a great way to do it. Zoom.us is a great way to do it too. And Ringer.com is a great way for both of you to kind of record a show at the same time using raw audio from both sides through the web application, ringer.com, ringr.com. But the way that I typically do it is through Skype. I know a lot of hosts who also do the co-host thing and then also invite another guest on through Zoom. Zoom.us is a great platform for that. Joaquin also is giving some more great advice on speaking. I think another thing is I typically podcast standing up, but this is a webinar, so I felt like I needed to sit down for some reason. I probably should have just stood up for this, so that allows me to kind of breathe and a little bit better too. Audio Acrobat, do you mean Adobe Audition? I don't know Audio Acrobat, actually. That could work. I use Adobe Audition to record my solo shows and also my intros and outros. Okay, here's a question from Josh. Seems that much of the questions and strategies here are oriented toward using a podcast to build a platform and then sell, about running online businesses, etc. Are there any differences between running a podcast oriented toward exploring various discussion topics, stories, experience that are geared more toward building a community than towards selling? Or would it be the same process? I realize that for longevity, eventually we would need to sell something. Josh, great perspective. We talked a lot about selling, building an email list and stuff. I still think it's important that for even the shows that you're talking about, which I think is many different shows, talking about experiences, stories, learning more about certain topics, going deeper into just having discussions to bring interest from other people and create a community behind that, you're still selling. You're still selling the idea that your podcast exists and it's something that needs to be listened to and subscribed to, right? So selling happens in many different ways. It's not just necessarily selling a product. So there's that aspect of it. But essentially the process is the same. The launch event is essentially the same. That's why the monetization module is not even until the very end. It's something that you can add on to if you'd like to. But what I would do is really focus on building that community. There's specific lessons in the course as well, specifically about building your community too, which is really cool. And there you go. So, and Di says, I have way too many ideas for what to talk about and who to interview. Is it okay to do that in the same podcast, or should I break it down into 2 or 3 different ones? Better SEO, ability to focus on different audiences. I would definitely niche down your specific episodes to be very topic driven. That way you can have people who, think about it. If people have a question about that particular topic, you can just say, oh, go listen to this episode of the podcast. We talk all about that. Instead of, I think we talk about that in the middle of episode 45. So scroll over to, maybe around the 20-minute mark to go and, listen to about that. Plus, if people are looking for specific information, they're going to want to find that specific answer, right? So that's why I feel like having them specific about specific topics are best. Let's see. What are the best tools to record a podcast on the go, mobile first, such as at a conference or meeting a guest at their office? So honestly, there are tools that you can use to record a podcast on your iPhone, even an interview face-to-face. What I would recommend is the Zoom H4n or the Zoom H6n. That's a sort of portable recording device that you can use. You can plug in your microphones on there really quick and just have a conversation. There's also, with the 6HN, there's some parts that you can add on top of it that will help you not even have to have special microphones because they're already attached on there and you can record them. And then in post-edit, you can level things off and make things sound great. So that's what I would recommend if you're recording podcasts on the go. Megan says, how do you get over the analysis and criticism of your own work starting out? I've been working on trying to record the first few episodes for the last several months and get frustrated because I just don't feel like it's good enough. The just don't feel like it's good enough syndrome. Yes, Megan, I completely understand where you're coming from because that was me first. I recorded my first episode 3 times. The first episode I recorded and I just was not happy with it. And I was just like really kind of actually disgusted because I kept saying and it just was terrible. The second episode, I scripted out every single word. I spent 4 hours writing every single word about what I was going to say. And I read it off and I recorded it. And it just was not okay either because I put myself to sleep. It was like listening to a lecture. It was so robotic and monotone. I just was not happy. And I said, you know what? Screw it. I'm just going to go. Whatever happens, happens. And that's the kind of mentality you have to have. If you've done all the prep work to understand, okay, what is it that you want to talk about? You just have to go. As my buddy JLD talks about, John Lee Dumas, John is awesome. He wished me luck on this launch for my course the other day, and he has a course of his own too, Podcaster's Paradise, which is also amazing. I love people who have come from a place of abundance, and we all know that there's more room in this space. So I want to thank him just personally for that. He said, every master started as a disaster. And it's true. So get your disasters out there so that you can become a master. Okay, Megan, so there you go. All right. David says, Skype plus Mac trick. Use call recorder plugin and record as a multi-track, then normalize, level both sides of the conversation so both sides have the same volume. Yes, thank you, David. So there's a tool out there called Ecamm Call Recorder for Mac, which I talk about in the course, to help you record your Skype conversations. You can actually split the sides so that you can only download, so that you can actually have your side be one track and the other person on the other end be another track, and then you can normalize and level things off. Jenny says, do you advise having the podcast content in writing along with the podcast audio episode on your website for SEO? Does it matter? It helps. It helps to have a transcription, and it helps to have it on your website for SEO purposes too. But it is a significant investment to do that, and it may not be worth it up front. What I mean by that is every minute of your episode is going to cost you about $1. Just think about it that way. I use a tool called rev.com, rev.com, and that is something that you can use to transcribe your show. A human being on the other end is going to transcribe your show. So what's cool about that is you get this amazing transcript back. You can repurpose that in many different ways, right? You can just live on that show notes blog post for your show so people can read it. It can be its own PDF file that you can give away. You can transcribe, or you can take those transcriptions and put them into a book, which you eventually turn into. You can take small quotes and put them into social media cards if you want. There's a lot of things you can do with that, but it is a significant investment. So a 30-minute episode will cost you $30, and if you do that every single episode, it's going to cost you over $100 per month on something that doesn't necessarily have a true tangible ROI on it immediately, which I know is not an excuse not to do it. But at the same time, when you're starting out, I actually wouldn't recommend, if you don't have the money for it, to spend money on the transcription. Sorry, Amy, rev.com, rev.com. And Michelle's asking, hey, are all these questions that are being talked about here in this stream talked about in the course? And yes, absolutely. And a lot more, obviously. Let's see. Chip asks, do you start out editing your own podcast or engage directly with a podcast editing service? I would recommend starting on your own, getting to know exactly how it works. That way you have an appreciation for it when you hand it off to other people. And here's the other thing. The last thing you would want to happen is you hand over your audio editing services to other people. You have no idea what's going on. And then that person drops off the face of the earth, or they just don't want to work with you anymore, or they moved on to something else. Then your show is not going to be produced, and you're kind of scrambling, right, to find another person. In the meantime, if that were to happen, if you had started on your own, you would know the procedure and be able to kind of pick up the slack on your own until you find somebody else to do it for you. Michael says, hi, Pat. How can listeners find my non-existing yet podcast? Is it like web SEO? iTunes is a search engine, okay? And you're going to be able to be found through iTunes. However, in the beginning, like with Google SEO, you're not going to be found in the beginning. So there's that. Utilizing your network, utilizing the guests that you have on your show, interviewing the right people like I talked about, those forum owners that you could interview. Those are the kinds of things, plus making an event out of your launch, having people who do listen to it, share it with their followers, getting into groups where you know those kinds of listeners exist. Dr. B, who is the person on featured in the podcast episode last week, she helps people with ADHD. She found meetups from people who are talking about ADHD through meetup.com. And she reached out to all the meetup organizers and said, hey, by the way, this would be a great podcast for you to share with your meeting people. And she reached out to like 20 plus meeting people from all different parts of the world. And that was, truly awesome. That's not even anything really that I taught. That she did that on her own. And her podcast is doing amazing. And so there's a number of different ways. You can also be creative with it, but finding where your audience exists and getting in front of them is essentially what you want to do. Rezi says, how many downloads listeners do I need to gain sponsorships? You don't have to have a certain amount because you pay per 1,000 downloads. However, I will say that you will need a significant amount to really make a larger impact. And I would recommend either starting out by promoting products as an affiliate first before you actually do sponsorships. You can do that right away from the beginning. Or if you have your own products, sell your own products too. All right, guys, water break. We're going to go for 15 more minutes. I've answered a total of 80 questions here, Zoom tells me. And it looks like I will not be able to get to all of them. But again, if you have specific questions, there's a couple questions related to, Simmons says, testing, are my questions come through? Yes, they are. Alex says, thanks for all the great questions. Hey, you guys are asking the great questions. I'm just answering them. So there's a couple questions I saw coming in related to the course. So really quick, I'll just mention those before I finish up. Let's see. So question about lifetime access. Yes, you get lifetime access to the course. You also get lifetime access to the community, and you also get lifetime access to office hours. Because yes, there are only 8 office hours scheduled, but every month I continue to do office hours. As new students come in, I'll put more batches of office hours in there. So we'll have Zoom conversations just like this. And alumni always get availability into those groups too. So I'm excited about that because it allows me to make sure that people who buy the course now to get it at the right price, they can still utilize the office hours later on, which is really cool. Michelle says, I'm so glad for this webinar and learning a lot, but this is totally new for me. Can a person that knows nothing about podcasts join your Power Up? Yes, there are people who have gone through the course who have literally not known anything about podcasting. They've come up, they now have their shows, and like Dr. B was one of them. And she now has hundreds of downloads every single day from new people. She told me that she has downloads from 21 different countries now. And with her work with helping people in ADHD, it's become really important for her. And this is now her primary form of building her business, which is really cool. There were also a couple questions about the bonus webinar. So, or the webinar bonus. So again, if you buy before the end of day today, the cart closes the end of day tomorrow, Monday. But if you, those of you watching the replay right now, if you are watching this in time, but also those of you who are watching live right now, if you get it by the end of today, you're going to get the bonus. That is, I'm going to listen to one of your first episode when it comes out, right? So this is partly a way for me to hold you accountable too, to actually doing the work. So when your first episode comes out, I will listen to one of them. I will critique it and give you some advice that you can use moving forward. The way to redeem that is when your first episode comes out, email me, pat@smartpassiveincome.com, and I'll with a link to your episodes, and then we'll go from there. Okay, would there still be a benefit for someone that has a podcast for a while? I'm on episode 26. I've had people who have signed up for the course who have had podcasts for a while and said they benefited from it, but I will say that the first 4 modules, James, will not be relevant to you if when it comes to setting it up and getting it out there, getting it up on iTunes and such, which is often a huge hurdle for people. So you're already over that. So it's up to you if you feel like it'll be helpful, especially with the community involved too, and the marketing aspect of it. But honestly, you are more likely able to just take information that you've probably learned already and just do that. I would hesitate to tell you, just because I want to make more money, to ask you to buy, knowing that you probably know, right? Like whenever I speak to people who have podcasts and we get down into the deep details of what they're doing, typically the conversation ends up with like, yeah, I knew I needed to do that. I just needed somebody to tell me to do it, right? Like, so James, you probably know what you can do to grow your show and you just haven't acted on that yet. That's where I would have your focus, right? So I don't want to convince you to buy the course if it doesn't make sense for you. All right. You guys are awesome. Thank you so much. And there's also a payment plan too. So if you can't front the one-time payment, you can, there's 4 monthly installments that you can do too if you want to just try it out. And plus there's a 60-day money-back guarantee. So if you try it out and you're like, this isn't for me, Pat, like please don't feel bad about asking me for a refund. I will give it to you 100%, no questions asked. I know, you guys might be like, Pat, I've known you for a while. You've never pushed a course this hard before. And yet that's because I never believed in something that I've created so much. I'm so confident in what this course can do to help you with building your brand or expanding the one that you have and starting your podcast, getting your voice out there, helping you build confidence along the way. I know that I have to push this out there in order to get in front of you. And I would be doing you a disservice if I didn't do so. But I also don't want to pressure you and just have you want to spend money with like James's question. He already has a podcast. So why would I want him to go through the first modules when he doesn't have to, right? So again, just being honest here. Let's get to a few more questions here. So A. Brown says, will it work effectively if I use all the content on my podcast as direct blog posts for my blog? Seems like killing 2 birds with 1 stone. Not that I'm killing 2 birds, but you get the idiom here. Yeah. I mean, you can have your show notes essentially be the blog posts for your blog. And then what happens is you have people, you want to make sure that expectation is set up front though. You don't want to tell people who are on your podcast to go, hey, go to the blog to get some new information, right? They're not going to get new information there. They're going to get the transcripts or the stuff that they've already learned. But you can say, hey guys, if you want to get the written content here, or see, perhaps you can't listen to audio tomorrow and you want to read, like you can listen to you can read the episodes too on the website. Or on the website, you can say, hey guys, by the way, I have the podcast version of this. I highly recommend you subscribe to it. You'll be able to, consume this content on the go. So you can have it go both ways. And yes, like you said, kill 2 birds. You get people who only listen, they can get your stuff. You have people who only read, they can get your stuff too. But it's when the expectations aren't met, or the expectation is one thing and something else is given differently, that then there is a discrepancy. So Joaquin says, who writes my show notes? I wrote all of my show notes for the first 5 years of my podcast, and I've only recently finally had somebody else on my team write them for me. So Saurabh says, I provide services to build reports for enterprise business owners. Many of them want to learn and do it themselves, but most of the time it requires scripting when it becomes advanced. Do you think any podcasts on such topics can be a success? Interesting. A great way to test a podcast subject is to potentially try and become a guest on another person's show. And by talking about that idea on another person's show, since this seems to be very specific, it's going to be likely that a podcaster who doesn't have the skill is going to likely to say yes to having you come on the show, because it's something that is an expertise that you have, a specialty, right, that this person does not have. So that's 1. 2, you can test the reaction based on A, is that person going to say yes to having you come on your show? But B, you can set up a landing page so that you can collect interested parties. So, hey, by the way, guys, thanks for having me on the show. John, just really appreciate you inviting me on to talk about, this stuff that I talk about. And by the way, for those of you listening, if you are just wanting to learn more about this stuff, I'm probably going to be starting a podcast very soon about that. But, I'd love to just be there for you when it comes out. And so if you want to subscribe, you can go to this website here, and I'll let you know when it comes out, and you'll be one of the first to listen to the episode. So there you go. Robin says, how much do advertisers pay for CPM, or cost per 1,000 listeners? The value changes between advertisers and also just case-by-case situations. So you might be able to actually ask for higher based on what else you might be giving them. So a link on the show notes, that's always one that I love. That's like a really easy add-on. Hey, we're going to also add a link on my website on the show that you're featured on. And you can talk about your website stat. That like opens up your website stats to, oh, by the way, we have like 50,000 people who visit the website every month, and now you're going to have a link on there. Perhaps you want to add a link on your email list or on the sidebar or on your resource page. I mean, there's a lot of excuses that you can make, or places, not excuses, but places that you can also mention that advertiser, which becomes an excuse for you to actually help increase the CPM, right? But then typically I would say between $23 and $45. I've gotten CPMs within that range, which is great. So if you have 1,000 downloads and you have a $30 CPM, you're going to get $30, right? But then, what if it's 10,000? Well, then $300. I'm doing math as on the go here. Kelly says, thank you. Regarding the analytics and advertising response, I have one more question. How do you optimize your podcast for discovery, especially new ones? Do you distribute it or do you submit it to iTunes? I understand ratings are important, but what else goes into that? Again, I talk about the whole launch execution plan and what to do after the show goes live to help it continue to get exposure. That's all in the course, so I don't have time to answer that in fully right now. But it does involve, a little bit of reaching out, a little bit of going and asking things. Like the last thing I want you to do is get all excited about coming up with a podcast, putting it out there. It's great, but then nobody finds it, right? So that's the sort of special sauce that I feel that I and Smart Passive Income has to add into this course versus some of those other courses, which are fantastic as well. Like, yes, I teach in my own style, which is unique to me too, but I also feel like the marketing and the launching and the continuation of your show after it goes live is what this course is really special for as well. So hope that you'll all be a part of it. Carlos says, normally it's a bad idea to use trademarks or third-party logos on your podcast cover, but if you see that the majority of the podcasts on your theme uses them, could you use them without concerns? If you use trademarks, you can never use them without concern. However, you'll be a little bit less concerned if you see other people using them and they have active shows that have had episodes come out recently. Now, that being said, when you use another person's trademark, you are potentially overstepping that intellectual property boundary, right? And it opens up the fact that at any moment in time, they could potentially change it up on you. There are some companies out there that know what I feel is right, which is that this is okay to do in some cases, right? Like Disney. Disney has a lot of shows that are done by third parties that are Disney themed in their trademark and use the Mickey and whatever, and all that stuff. Because they know, right? It's like, hey, our fans are really important, and our fans who are helping other fans come on board are really important too. But there are other companies like Facebook and eBay and other ones who, the moment they have teams of lawyers out there looking for, like, I set up a domain once called Pat on Facebook, and all it did was redirect to my Facebook page. I didn't even use it for anything other than just redirecting. And I got a cease and desist letter from Facebook because I was just simply using that trademark. So they're like hawks. Other ones might be in the middle, and it depends on who it is. The best thing you could do if you wanted to do that is to build a relationship with that company and have them give you permission, written permission. But there are some things to be concerned about if that's the case. Ideally, I would recommend against it, but there have been successful podcasts that have been up there and who continue to do very well, even though they use those trademarks there. All right, guys, a few more minutes here. Gary, do you always try to do video and audio podcasts at the same time and put the audio on iTunes and the video on YouTube similar? No, I don't always do that. Actually, I have a video podcast as well, and that's unique content that is video that is then also put on YouTube, but not the audio podcast. I don't put the audio podcast on video, or I don't put the video podcast on audio only. You can do that, but the way that I see it is I want every unique platform to have its own unique stuff. With the audio video sort of crossover, we talked about this a little bit earlier. You can get into a little bit gray areas in terms of the experience that an audience might have with the audio, especially because if you say anything that requires visual, here's the thing, right? Like if you have a video show and you strip that audio out and you put that into a podcast, if there are any moments in there that say, hey, look at this, or this thing that you're looking at right here, it's going to make that audio listener feel left out, right? So does that mean you not include that in your videos? Well, then what makes your video special? Why would you create a video if it's not something that people have to look at, right? So there's, that's why I feel like there should be unique content on each of those platforms, if that makes sense. All right. Is it more effective to be a guest host on someone else's podcast or to have a guest host? It's not more effective. I mean, I feel like it depends on who the person is that you're speaking with and in what context and what the topic is about and how it gets shared, all that stuff. Anonymous attendee asks, I've taken your free podcast tutorial. Does this course have overlap information? Very little overlap because that free podcasting tutorial essentially just talks about the setup in a very basic way. This goes much more into depth with the setup, poweruppodcasting.com, poweruppodcasting.com, that is. But also it goes into the marketing, the getting found. And, my aspect with marketing is like, the last thing you want to do is beg for listeners, right? Like I want to show you ways that you can earn listeners. And that's what this course is all about in that aspect. Plus I talk about the marketing of it and we get into, a finer detail about, your podcast artwork, everything from interviewing skills, the right questions to ask, how to get people on your show. So there's a little bit of overlap, but I would say maybe just 10 to 15%. Okay, Hugh says, what do you do to prep the guest for the podcast interview? So there's a lot of things that need to happen before you even begin to talk to that person, right? So making sure the scheduling is all set in place, the time zones are correct, getting everybody to know where everybody's going to meet at. So if it's a Skype conversation, you want to make sure you know each other's Skype stuff. You get the contact in there beforehand so that when the time happens, you just are ready to go, right? So there's the stuff that happens beforehand. I would also prep them in terms of what the show is going to be about, general ideas about topics that are going to be covered. Sometimes interviewers ask for questions, and typically I'll say, well, I don't like to ask, I don't like to pre-qualify, or I don't like to ahead of time think about specifically the questions that I'm going to ask, because this is just a conversation between you and I, just like we were at a coffee shop. I love to say that, hey man, it's just like we're at a coffee shop. That really relaxes them, makes them feel like, okay, we're just going to have a conversation. That's really cool. But I also say, okay, well, but here are the topics that I want to talk about because I know you're great at them. I want to talk about Facebook marketing, how you used Facebook to grow your recent launch to over 6 figures. And we'll just talk about that and also talk about your story and how you got started. So that's what I do before the call to prep. As soon as the call starts, I obviously thank the person for being there. I let them know immediately, and I talk about all these tips in a checklist format in the course. So when a person comes on, I say, Hugh, man, thank you for taking the time today. We'll get started in just a minute. I haven't hit record yet. That's really important because you don't want people to think that they're on and being recorded already. So again, another relaxer. Okay, good. But I just want to say, hey, just to recover, or just to cover what we're going to talk about again, we're going to talk about your story and your launch and this other thing. And again, just like it's just like we're in a coffee shop. I'm getting to know you, and the listeners on the other end, they're just like a fly on the wall. So if you have any questions, let me know. And, I'm going to turn off the video. Typically I like to just open with video and just say hi. And then I turn off the video to save bandwidth if I'm on Skype. And then I go, okay, I'm going to start recording in 3, 2, 1. And then I typically go from there. Now I will record the intros later. So, it's good to tell that person that too. I've been on a guest on podcast before where a person's like, okay, we're going to start recording. And then they record their intro for 5 minutes before they start asking me a question, right? And I'm just kind of sitting there, right? And you have to respect the time that the other person has and that they've come on your show as well. So typically I'll say something like, I'm just going to record the formal intro after this episode is done, but we're just going to get right started. I'll welcome you to the show and we'll go from there. Let's see, 375 something or other. Even though you didn't answer my question, it was a blast hanging out. I apologize about that. If you have a question, let me know. You can ask on the intercom sort of chat window on the sales page, or you can even send me an email if you want. I'll do my best to answer and field questions. I know that's kind of my job the next 2 days before the doors close. And again, make sure, guys, that you get that bonus that's available to you today. Make sure you sign up before the end of the day today if you want to get that bonus for the special audit that's going to be available only to you guys for that. So poweruppodcasting.com. Also going to be sending you a replay for this later on. And guys, great questions. I'm sorry I couldn't get to all of them, but I want to thank you so much just for having me. And yeah, so anyway, let me stop sharing my screen really quick. Let me answer. Hey guys, I just feel bad leaving all these questions on the table here. Okay, here's what I'm going to do. Because I like nice round numbers, I've answered 89 questions so far. And there's a lot more, but I want to get to 100. So I can say I answered 100 questions. Okay, so I'm going to stick around until we get to 100. So that's 11 more questions, okay? Whew. Okay, so, okay. Here we go. Oh, actually, I've answered 90. Hughes was number 90. Okay, Andy says, sorry for being so verbose. I am very interested in starting a podcast that is very much different than my competition. I say different because me and my co-host would not necessarily be the expert. However, my potential guests would be. I hesitate a little bit about this idea because I internalize the statement, you should provide value to your listeners. Do you have any thoughts, reservations, guidance for someone like me who wants to start a podcast who isn't necessarily an expert? Let me give you a good example who wasn't somebody who wasn't an expert, who is now an expert and who has been able to invite expert guests on the show even before they were an expert. John Lee Dumas, when he started, actually, I was interviewed number 1. Now he's at like 1,600 or something, which is insane because he does the daily show, which I wouldn't recommend. But he was somebody who came on board, did interviews with experts. He was not an expert himself, and now he's since been able to, through 2 things. One, through association with the people he's interviewed, become an expert, but also just through what he's learned, share information that he's learned as an expert with podcasting, with webinars, all those kinds of things. So you don't have to be an expert to have an expert come on the show and provide value. I mean, that's why I invite guests on the show, because they are experts at certain things that I am not an expert in. Get that back crack going. Okay, 9 more questions. What's your take on going for a custom website straight away compared to WordPress to accompany your podcast? Don't waste your time. A custom website is great, but I would get your show up and running first. Use a theme out of the box. You can customize that a very little bit to kind of have your personality behind it. Get your show up and running, because every day you waste trying to get your custom website up, plus the money involved with that, plus your show isn't even live yet. Like, I would have your show live, learn about your audience, get your voice heard, and then build a custom website if you wanted to. You might even not need it anymore, or want to need it anymore after that. So there you go. Like, I would totally just get an out-of-the-box theme and use that. Thanks, Tiger. Appreciate you. How do your wife as well? Hope she gets to watch this later. Amy C says, what if you're not sure if your target audience is listening to or even familiar with podcasts? So you have a couple advantages here. First of all, they are likely listening. You just haven't found the place where they are finding them yet. But also, if they're not, you have the opportunity to be the one to introduce them to podcasts. How amazing is that opportunity? Now, I can't do that, right? Sometimes it happens, like, what is a podcast? Oh, let me show you. Oh my gosh, that's crazy, right? But if you were to provide that information, maybe you have an audience already on a website, or you can go onto another person's website as a guest blogger and then go and say, hey, by the way, I have this podcast. If you aren't familiar with podcasts, they're sort of like radio shows that you could subscribe to. And we talk about all the things related to whatever it is you're interested in, right? And here are the steps you need to sign on and listen to my podcast. Recommend, like, here's what you do. And you can create a video showing people using the phone exactly how to do it. I would do it on the phone, not desktop. So you can do a screen recording using something like ScreenFlow or Camtasia and say, okay, here's how you go and find Amy C's show. You go and open the podcast app, or if you're on an Android, you use this one instead, Google Play. You look up this word here, you click here to subscribe, and you can get access to all of my shows for free. And if you become the person to introduce a person to podcasting, I mean, how much of an awesome experience is it to have been listening to podcasts, right? You might not remember the first time you listened to a podcast, but I remember mine because it was just such an eye-opening, like, whoa, I have access to all this free stuff. I accidentally found it myself, but if you can be the person to introduce it to people, I mean, they're going to love you for it. So you have an opportunity. It's not a disadvantage. Anonymous attendee says, Pat, how do you feel about people using the audio from live stream interviews to make podcast episodes? I have 100 interviews from live stream shows that would likely get more replay listens than podcasts. I would edit out non-evergreen parts. Do it. Perry Tinsley was a person who came on who did a video podcast, so similar video show, and he was then convinced to do an audio version, and he just ripped out parts of his video show, put it into audio format, and his audio show is now on the What's Hot list, the Power Blast podcast, and he said that he's now seeing even more downloads with that than the video version, so definitely something to do. Purpose Girl says, what length do you recommend for a podcast episode? We covered that already. Josh says, it seems that much. Oh, we've talked about that already. Oh, you guys are asking the same questions over and over and over again. That's okay. I'll answer a few more here. Lori says, how long are you available after the completion of your podcasting course? Meaning like me to help you. I'm always going to be there. The community is always going to be there. And also, like, if you aren't down with this community, like, you should be in there. Absolutely. So here's poweruppodcasting.com is where to go. I'm going to show you the community really quick. There's actually people wanting to join even as we go. There's a couple hundred members here, more coming on all the time. There are people in here that are just like, getting some more videos done tonight. People sharing their artwork here. There are people sharing or asking questions. There was one here the other day from, just everybody's excited to be here, right? The awesome content and the timing of this class is so perfect, says Julia. Almost feels like it was made specifically for me. Somebody was posting here. Here we go. Jason says, who's having fun with all this? I love that. Cynthia says, it's been fun. Instead of something I'm going to do, it's something I'm doing. I love that. So when you get access to the course, you get access to the community for life. You get access to office hours with me. When new students come in, I'm going to be opening up more office hours. Alumni are always welcome to those. And then also you have lifetime access to the course anyway. So there you go. John says, how important is it to have your podcast episodes transcribed to your post on we answered that one already. You don't have to do it. It can help, but I wouldn't do it necessarily right away unless you feel like you can afford it, or perhaps you are utilizing those transcripts for something even more than just the transcription part of it, but maybe like a book or social media cards or something where it can actually provide you some ROI, because it does get a little bit expensive. How much do you plan your content to link with your paid offerings? So my team and I, we plan our editorial calendar in advance. Every quarter, we meet for planning the 2 quarters ahead of us. So in Q1, we plan Q3, and Q4, we plan Q4. And so what that does is it allows us to see what we're promoting at that time, right? That's what we're planning. What are we promoting and when? And what content can we produce to support it? If you've noticed, the Power Up Podcasting promotion was surrounded on the blog and podcast, free stuff, by things related to podcasting. So actually, I'm doing a presentation in this will be the last thing I finish with, but I think it's going to be very powerful. So I'm going to be speaking in Australia about my editorial calendar. This is at the Pro Blogger Conference, but I wanted to give you something really quick. So the launch of Power Up Podcasting happened on July 17th. The doors close tomorrow. But here's all the stuff that happened in and around that related to editorial to help support that and get people ready for it. On June 26th, a blog post called 10 Reasons Why Podcasting is the #1 content platform. 2 days later on the podcast month is coming up, something special. So that was at the end of that episode because it was still not podcasting month yet. So July 3rd, top 10 tips for brand new podcasters. July 5th on the podcast, 7 powerful things that can happen. That was episode 263. That can happen 273, sorry, as a result of starting your podcast. So there I tell very personal stories about what has happened in my life as a result of starting a podcast, how I almost gave up on it, and all those kinds of things. July 12th on the podcast, a week later, how to avoid the slimy sell with Shalene Johnson. There we actually inject and talk about the podcasting course a little bit because it was with her audience that I beta tested it. July 17th on the blog, Power Up Podcasting is now live. July 21st on the podcast. This is during launch week on the podcast. I invited 3 students from the previous course, the course launch, the beta group, to talk about their experience with starting their show, all the fear that they have, but also all the benefit that they've had now going through the course. So you can see how the content has helped support these launches and paid content. It doesn't happen all the time, but when there is something to promote, the content should be there to help promote it. So it's not just coming out of the blue. But again, each of these individual free blog posts or podcast episodes are valuable in and of itself. And now for people who now realize that podcasting is important, who want to go deeper, there's the course. Or maybe you're now watching this webinar or the replay live. So you could see the content should support those promotions that happen, and you should give yourself some time leading up to it. All right, guys, that was the 100th question that was asked, or the one that I've clicked through. And I just want to thank you so much for taking time with me today. We spent a lot of time together, over 2 hours, guys. So hopefully you got some value. A lot of you stuck with me the entire time, and I appreciate you so much. And one more time, just to give you that offer, make sure you get access to Power Up Podcasting right now if you can, because that is a course that I put together with my heart and soul to help you with something that I know is going to help you with your business and your brand. And as you can tell, I'm very passionate about this. And there's a lot of questions that are still left to be answered, and they're all answered in there in that course. You get access to the Student Center and also to me with office hours. The first group of office hours happens this Tuesday, actually, where you can begin asking questions related to your particular show and your particular situation. So anyways, guys, thank you so much. I appreciate you. Get the bonus before the end of day today, and I will see you soon. Good luck to you. Bye.